to Best Love Films, the podcast that goes with bestlovefilms.com. Let's begin by acknowledging that this land, the United States of America, was stewarded beautifully by hundreds of generations of Native Americans before any white people showed up. We want to thank them for that and promise to try to leave this land better. My name is Daniel Smith-Rousey. I am a filmmaker with a PhD in Film and American Studies, and I've published 3 books about cinema and media. Today, I would like to welcome to the podcast the lead visual effects editor at Industrial Light and Magic, more commonly known as ILM, sometimes Lucasfilm. She's also a member of Society of Rockets, which just got signed to a label, Monotream. Their album Unearthed is coming on that. She also just directed this amazing video, the animation, which for the video Calico. Her name is Lorelei David. Yay, welcome to the podcast, hey. Lorelei.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Great, how are you today?
I'm doing all right.
It's wonderful to have you here. Thanks for watching these 5 movies. I know it's not always easy, especially when it's long and boring, like Sayonara or what, or
no,
whatever.
It was good. Like it was nice to get like some history of a span of time that I'm not really that familiar with.
Right.
Like I feel like I know like 80s sci-fi, and like that's like right. My strongest suit.
That's true. Well, it's always fun to fill in those gaps, Well, cool. Well, before let's not get there yet. Or wait, you know what? Let's get right there. Never mind. But let me frame it like this. I like to begin by reminding listeners about the previously discussed critical and audience chosen American canon for the period. In this case, that's the 5-year period from 1957 to 1961. And that canon consists of 12 Angry Men, The Bridge on the River Kwai, Touch of Evil, Vertigo, Rio Bravo, Some Like It Hot, Imitation of Life, Ben-Hur, North by Northwest, Psycho, Spartacus, The Apartment, and West Side Story. This was Hollywood's first opportunity to react to the civil rights movement. And by industry standards, some of those films I just mentioned are kind of reasonable reactions, yet none of those 13 films feature, say, for example, Marlon Brando, Sidney Poitier, or Audrey Hepburn. So they're clearly not telling Hollywood's full story of this period. More broadly, this group of podcast episodes that you're currently listening to, the C-list, is dedicated to the milestones of the marginalized, the unparalleled of the underprivileged. And so we are here to fill in the gaps, like I just said, a bit, to elucidate how Hollywood steadily improved representation and how far the industry still had to go. The 5 films from today for the 1957-61 period are Sayonara, The Defiant Ones, A Raisin in the Sun, Flower Drum Song, and The Children's Hour. Before we jump in, Lorelei, I mean, you don't have to have an answer to this question, but was there anything you noticed that all 5 of these films even had in common? Not really, I'm guessing. They all had actors in them? I don't know.
You mean aside from like James Garner being in like 2 of it, like it was
up
nice
with
to
that?
see the overlap. I thought. Yeah. I like James Garner is like he's just going to be like the dude that is totally like, he can see what's going on and he's just going to react normally to it.
He's token bohunk dude, like token slab of meat white guy, right? I guess because we sort of needed to, it's funny if you look at comic books from the 50s and 60s, they always had that token guy that's sort of like the Dick Grayson, hey, I'm just a guy, kind of, like they needed that. Rick Jones is here, hi.
And they look like James Garner.
Yeah, that's who Garner is here, I think. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Go ahead. There was just there were some similarities that I thought of, but across all 5, I can't say that I really can really.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. There doesn't have to be some answer to that question. So, but yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there before we sort of get on a more granular level. Okay, well, one thing I wanted to say is compared to the last couple of podcast episodes that my awesome listeners have just heard, and also compared to the A-list and B-list of this period, which those great listeners have also heard, this group of 5 does not provide much in the way of representations of Latinos or Native Americans, Part of that is that Hollywood didn't produce that many milestones for either of those groups during this time. I do wish that more people knew that Desilu Productions, run by Cuban-American Desi Arnaz, along with his wife, Lucille Ball, shrewdly negotiated for all of the film rerun rights for I Love Lucy, which made Desilu Productions rich enough in 1957 to buy all of RKO's sound stages and some other sound stages, and which made Desilu technically larger in this period than MGM or Fox. Desilu did produce films like Touch of Evil and some films you've never heard of, but mostly focused on TV, developing shows from The Untouchables to Star Trek. This particular website that, you know, this podcast is about, this digital museum, is not about TV, so we're not really going there. Besides, during the 1950s, TV was considered cinema's hostile rival, not another synergistic content provider, the way it is looked at now. However, that said, the highly impressive story of Desilu Productions should be familiar to anyone who seeks more Latinos and women running studios, which should be everyone. Okay, that's that. I just want to get that out of the way. Now I want to rewind to 1948, when James Michener won a Pulitzer Prize for his book, Tales of the South Pacific, which was adapted by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein in 1949 into the also Pulitzer Prize winning musical, South Pacific, that became Broadway's most successful show of the 50s. While Broadway audiences of the early 50s were watching this show's secondary romance, a cross-racial one between a white soldier and a Vietnamese woman, James Michener was experiencing something comparable while embedded as a reporter with the Navy in Korea. Michener's first full-length novel, set during the Korean War, Sayonara, was based partly on Michener's own extramarital affair with Marie Yoriko Sabusawa while he was married to a white woman whom he would divorce in 1955 to marry Sabusawa. Before being published as a book in 1954, Sayonara began publication as serialized chapters in 1953. But it's too much to give Michener credit for America's 1954 passage of laws that struck down codes that banned interracial marriage between Asians and Caucasians. These new laws in 54 were just for Asians and Caucasians. They didn't speak to other races. Writing Sayonara, subtitled A Japanese-American Love Story, Michener did expand upon a theme he had only touched upon in Tales of the South Pacific by more directly addressing the famous Madame Butterfly stereotype. Okay, and he had, you know, personal reasons for doing that. Okay, so now I need to explain that to the good listeners, and I'm sure Lorelei will also have an opinion on that. If you don't know, the Madame Butterfly story is about a Western, often American soldier who comes to Japan, begins a love affair with Madame Butterfly, faces harsh judgment from both cultures, impregnates her, leaves her as she gives birth, and sends his white wife to bring the child back to the West, upon which Butterfly commits suicide. Yay! Okay. As a story, Madame Butterfly began with French novelist Pierre Loti, was made into the first Madame Butterfly by American writer John Luther Long, morphed into the play Madame Butterfly, A Tragedy of Japan by American David Belasco, and crucially adapted by Giacomo Puccini into Madama Butterfly, an opera that premiered in 1904 and became one of the world's most popular touring operas by the time Americans dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, where the tale is set. By 1945, there had been no fewer than 5 film versions of the story, including Madame Butterfly from 1915 that starred America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford, in Yellowface, as well as The Toll of the Sea from 1922, which moved the action to China and was both the first 50-minute plus film ever to be in color or to star Anna May Wong. And don't forget Madame Butterfly from 1932, a non-musical featuring Puccini underscoring, starring Sylvia Sidney in Yellowface, and in his first lead role, Cary Grant, as well as a version by Japan's all-female Takarazuka Revue, who in the film Sayonara get morphed into the Matsubayashi. The point of all this history, and I know it's a lot of history, is to say that by 1954, Madame Butterfly was by far the best known story to Westerners about the Far East. And just as surely as the mammy and mulatto stereotypes hung over all Black women on screen, just as surely as the Mexican Spitfire stereotype hung over all Latinas on screen, the Madame Butterfly stereotype hung over Asian women on screen, which is to say, what is it now? Let's kind of name it, a sort of a geisha-like, kimono-clad, deferential, lotus blossom, China doll, or similar. As Harry Benshoff and Sean Griffin define it, quote, Asia is represented by the exotic, meek, and long-suffering butterfly, a woman who will do anything for the man she loves, including die for him, unquote. Whether or not Mishner's or the Hollywood version of Sayonara got past that stereotype is something that I want to discuss with you, Lorelei, after. I feel like it's better to bring that up after I sort of summarize the film's plot, because otherwise it's like, what? But well, I don't know. Anything to say before we actually say Sayonara? What did you think of my summary of the Madame Butterfly stereotype? Did I leave a lot out? Did I screw it up?
I
No, I don't know. I'm probably gonna get this wrong.
Well, the thing that came to mind when I was listening to it was, bringing up Anna May Wong, and how she was like totally against it, and she fought her whole career against that stereotype.
Yes, she did.
And it really pissed her off that those were the roles that were given to her, and this was like in 1920s, right?
Yes.
And the roles that were given to like the strong Asian women were yellowface.
Yes.
And that just pissed her off. And that's what I think of when I think of like the Madame Butterfly stereotype and the, lotus blossom and all that. And going into Sayonara, jumping ahead, but I thought it was
Go ahead.
I thought it was interesting that she was supposed to be cast in that, but she had passed away before production.
Right. Was that? I thought that was from Flower Drum.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Flower Drum Song.
Okay, right. Because she would have been, I mean, much as I love her, she would have been a little old to have played like a 20-something by then,
No, I think she was just going to be I don't think she was going to be the main character.
Oh, I know. In Flower Drum Song, she was going to play Madame Leon, which I was going to say later. I'm sorry, there wasn't really a good role for her in Sayonara, is what I'm saying. Yeah, but sure. Right. Hey, did you notice that she's going to be on Dollars? Like they just announced that. Did you catch that?
I saw that. That's so cool.
Isn't that? I mean, I love it. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring up anime. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I couldn't remember if it was dollars or quarters, but I know she's going to be on a coin.
Oh, right. Yeah, awesome. Good point. Actually, I was going to say one more thing about Wong, which is that although the opera was famous and popular, one possible reason that Madame Butterfly hadn't been made in America since 1932 was the strict 1934 Hays Code against miscegenation. Now, hold on. Louis B. Mayer had cited that statute as the reason he couldn't cast Anna May Wong as the lead character Olan in 1937's The Good Earth, because Louis Mayer, the most powerful man in Hollywood, claimed that the Daniel Day-Lewis of the era, Paul Muni, had already been cast as the male lead, of course, cast in yellowface. Now, the white woman that they got to play Olan, Louise Rayner, won an Oscar for the role, which could have been Wong's, right? Mayer may have erred, or he may have been lying. The strict wording of the 1934 Hays Code defined miscegenation as romance between someone white and someone black, which is interesting. Nonetheless, it is interesting. Nonetheless, in the 8 films that Anna May Wong starred in after 1934, she was arguably never quite seen kissing a white man. Charlie Chan and his #1 son likewise did not kiss white women. Fu Manchu, if he kissed anyone, it was only out of evil intent. And the point is that Hollywood didn't seem to want to take a chance on restoring any sexuality to Asian or Asian American characters until possibly King Vidor's 1952 film, Japanese War Bride, which is a film I cannot find on streaming, unlike 20 of Vidor's other films. Yeah, okay. Let's get closer to our period for the time. So in 1955, any script starring a man under 45 went first to the 2 most recent Best Actor Oscar winners, who were Marlon Brando and William Holden, and then to others if both Holden and Brando turned the script down. In 1955, Love is a Many-Splendored Thing co-starred as cross-racial lovers in Hong Kong, William Holden and Jennifer Jones in yellowface. In 1956, and the pinched eyes. In 1956, no, it's not good. In 1956, the Tea House of the August Moon, which is a story that is in many ways empathetic to the Japanese, also starred Marlon Brando in yellowface. One would like to think that both Holden and Brando were somehow aware of some combination of James Wong Howe winning an Oscar in '56, the Broadway successes of South Pacific and The King and I, the latter's summer 1956 film version, and the nascent civil rights movement. And you'd like to think that Brando and Holden realized they'd erred, or at least could do a lot better than they had. So Holden soon signed on to the all-male The Bridge on the River Kwai, which is not a film that is free of stereotypes, but it is something of a masterpiece, and Asian roles are at least played by Asians, including the triumphant return of Sesue Hayakawa. White director Joshua Logan was South Pacific's original director and was slated to direct its film adaptation after the musical had earned enough money on tour. But in the meantime, Logan made his first Hollywood feature films, 1955's Picnic, based on a play Logan had directed and starring William Holden, and 1956's Bus Stop, based on another play and starring Marilyn Monroe in her first dramatic lead after she'd taken actor's studio classes. Though based on plays, both Picnic and Bus Stop were set and made in flyover Western states that Hollywood considered so exotic to American audiences so as to deserve presentation in full-color CinemaScope. The massive CinemaScope cameras led to a sort of sluggish, slothful, slackened cinema style that I feel Logan also brought to his third film, Sayonara, which was shot in Technirama, Warner Brothers' brand new competitor to CinemaScope. Now, to be fair to Logan, Joshua Logan, the director, Warner Brothers wanted to roadshow Sayonara, and a roadshow film could not be shot like the next film we'll discuss, The Defiant Ones. They couldn't. Why not? Because roadshows were Hollywood's idea of how to compete with television in the 50s. Full color, widescreen adventures, usually showing exotic places and presented in downtown movie palaces at premium prices, sometimes with programs, ushers, intermissions, and the like. The King and I, and especially The Ten Commandments, had proved very successful roadshows starring at least partly Asian Yul Brynner, during the 6 months before William Getz's production of Sayonara began principal photography in January 1957 in Japan, which continued for 4 months, overlapping with the same time that Sam Spiegel and David Lean were filming The Bridge on the River Kwai in Sri Lanka. Okay, so now I want to spell out the plot of Sayonara for the nice people, and then you and I get to explain how it worked and how it didn't work and what was good about it and what wasn't. Is that okay? Did anything I'm forgetting before I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Let's do it.
I like it. Okay, talk about your context. I mean, we've given some context here. Thank you for sitting there nicely while I gave all that mansplanation. Okay. I do appreciate it. Sayonara begins with
I like that.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Please.
No, I was just going to say, like, I like the talking about the Technorama, like the widescreen of it. That was one of the things that I really liked between all the different movies, was just the different aspect ratios and the color of one and the black and white of the other. And I thought it was really nice to see. I didn't realize that there used to be an Oscar category for cinematography in color and cinematography in black and white.
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and it's such a postcard from the 50s and early 60s. I mean, these 5 films of like what they were doing. And at the time, CinemaScope and its competitors were such a big deal. Like that was a huge part of the promotion. You know, they were like, we're not TV, we're CinemaScope, you know. Nowadays, it's like,
totally.
I don't want to say duh. Here you work at ILM, which is like creating the future. But I mean, like, I feel like people are less impressed these days by, hey, it's in some big screen format, you know. Yeah, but
totally in 4D or whatever they're.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know. Maybe it's still cool. I don't know.
Smell-o-vision.
Smells good. Well, imagine this Sayonara and Smell-o-vision. I would love that. Sayonara begins with a modified traditional Japanese font spelling out Marlon Brando, Sayonara, and the rest of the card credits over shots of a Japanese tea garden. In Korea in 1951, Air Force Major Lloyd Ace Groover lands his plane, reports 2 kills, and gets examined. Brando's naked chest fills up that Technorama screen Lorelei and I were just discussing within the film's first 4 minutes, which I believe was something they really wanted to do to make sure they got that in. That chest is being examined by a doctor who tells Groover he's being shipped to Japan. Groover meets with his friend Airman Kelly, who tells Groover about Katsumi, the Japanese woman he loves, causing Groover to reveal a photo of his own girlfriend and add, quote, I believe that maybe you've forgotten what an American girl looks like, ... A girl with fine character, a girl with good background, good education, good family, good blood, unquote. This is a white woman. Okay, thank you, Groover. After listing the forces arrayed against his marriage to Katsumi, Kelly claims that for her, he'd give up his US citizenship if necessary, causing Groover to call him stupid and ignorant and call her a, quote, slant-eyed runt, unquote.
Oh,
But,
cringy, cringy.
cringe. But I mean, the movie knows it's cringe, so it's not as cringy as some things could be. Go ahead.
I didn't know that going in, and I was just like, oh, what is he making me watch? Like, this is like,
right. Yeah, exactly. I know. Right. Well, yes, you're right. Good point. But Groover apologizes and shakes Kelly's hand, at least in that moment. Still, he didn't exactly disavow it. As their transport plane approaches Kobe, Japan, Kelly informs Groover about all-male kabuki, all-female Matsubayashi, and asks if Groover will be his best man, to which Groover very reluctantly agrees. At Kobe's airfield, General and Mrs. Webster surprise Groover with their daughter Eileen, who kisses Groover in their car's backseat while they share racy comments about going in and out, certainly by 50s standards. Captain Mike Bailey attempts to bring his Japanese girlfriend into an officers' club, but gets obstructed by General Webster and Groover, who blames Bailey for, quote, insolence through manner, unquote. At a kabuki, Eileen reads from the program to Lloyd that Nakamura is a, quote, male actress. It says here they've been trained since childhood to have the grace of a woman and yet the power of a man, unquote. Interesting. After a twilight gazebo dinner overlooking Kobe, Eileen grills Groover over the possibility of turning into his isolated parents, asks if she's merely a type or an expectation, and challenges him, quote, haven't you ever felt like grabbing me and hauling me off to a shack somewhere, unquote. Again, by 50s standards, this is kind of racy, especially for a big budget. No? In a perfunctory military ceremony, Joe Kelly marries Katsumi, kisses Katsumi, and calls for Katsumi to kiss Groover, who does, after learning from the presiding officer that about 10,000 GIs have become spouses in this semi-secret sort of ceremony. In Webster's office, Webster reprimands Groover because his presence at the ceremony reflects poorly on him, Webster, as area commander. And we also see Eileen and Groover refusing to set their next date. After Groover and Bailey bond warily over Groover's ambivalence about marriage and the Air Force, Bailey shows him the bitchy bashi, which also seemed very, I mean, that's the white name for it, which I thought that's another racy thing by 50s. The Marine term, and it's a Marine term, as he says, for the bridge that Matsubayashi girls use, including Mike's girlfriend, as well as Hanaogi, who catches Groover's interest. After Bailey and Groover watch the Matsubayashi perform near the Bichibashi, Groover prompts Katsumi to approach Hanaogi, but Katsumi returns to tell Kelly, who tells Groover that Hanaogi refuses to speak to any American because American bombs killed her family. Groover takes to hanging around near the Bichibashi and creepily observing Hanaogi until Kelly walks up and invites him to a dinner with special guest Hanaogi at his house. Ooh. Groover arrives early, acknowledges workers dyeing kimono fabric in a canal, and awkwardly participates in Japanese traditions, like removing his shoes, kneeling on a tatami, using an oshibori, and drinking hot sake. Hanaogi tells Lloyd she has seen Americans as savages, has seen he is no savage, has a life planned as first dancer and eventual teacher, yet has a willingness to risk love with Lloyd. Eileen spends time with Nakamura and eavesdrops when Colonel Crayford complains to General Webster about Groover becoming one of the men, quote, shacking up with the, quote, indigenous. These are words this racist colonel uses. At Kelly and Katsumi's house, now dressed in house robes, Groover cooks for and kisses Hanaogi, watches her make a puppet sing Irving Berlin's Sayonara. Let's be clear, that's a song written by a white guy. Sees her leave and welcomes her back. But it's Eileen, warning Groover that Crayford is on the warpath and many enlisted men look up to Lloyd. After Tanahata fireworks and a Jidejeki drama, Nakamura takes Eileen to a tea garden, tells her many Japanese feel mutual contempt for whites, but tenders that he doesn't feel that way and would like to see Eileen another time. After Lloyd learns of a list of men being transferred stateside, including Kelly, Groover and Kelly storm into Crayford's office where they are rebuffed, even after Kelly tells the colonel Katsumi is pregnant. Crayford adds that no soldier is now permitted in the house by the canal. Groover meets with the Webster family, fails to convince the general to intercede, and announces his own intention to marry a Japanese girl, an idea that back at Kelly and Katsumi's comes as a surprise to Hanaogi, who tells Lloyd she can't marry anyone as she's obligated to Matsubayashi because they let her return honor to her family after her father sold her. Whoa. Nearby, Kelly freaks out at Katsumi because she planned to surprise him with an eye-widening procedure, and Kelly loves her exactly the way she is. Don't do that. The two pairs of lovers attend a puppet show which dramatizes what Hanaogi calls the custom of lovers to die together if they cannot live together. At the end of the evening, Katsumi discovers soldiers have boarded off her home and also discovers that her husband is headed back to the US. He hadn't had the guts to tell her before that. General Webster arranges for Hanaogi to be confined to the Matsubayashi and Groover to be confined under house arrest until he too is soon shipped stateside. When MPs can't find Kelly, they solicit the help of Groover and Bailey, who break into their boarded off house to find Kelly and Katsumi dead in each other's arms in a shroud, as Hanaogi secretly watches from a window whispering, "Sayonara, Kelly-san, sayonara, Katsumi-san, sayonara, Lloyd-san." An enormous crowd is gathered around the house, many with signs saying, "Go home, Yankees," and the like, and some begin to beat up Bailey and Groover, but others defend them, and the pair of white men manage to make their way away from the melee. Groover searches all around the Matsubayashi quarters, but other dancers inform him Hanaogi is gone. General Webster expresses regret over everything, especially because the US is about to pass a law to permit Americans to bring home Japanese brides. Groover flies to Tokyo, sees Hanaogi in a new show, finds her backstage, tells her he's being forced to leave Japan the next day, asks if she loves him, and insists they get married. When she says they're of different races and asks what their kids will be, he answered, they'll be half Japanese, half American. This is my terrible Brando Southern imitation. Half yellow, half white, half you, half me. I know, well, at least that's the only. Yeah, thanks, I appreciate that. In the crowded lobby, Japanese and American reporters descend upon Hanaogi and Groover as she explains she plans to marry and raise kids with Groover. And when Stars and Stripes asks if Groover has any comment for the American military, he says, "Yeah, tell them we said sayonara." Roll credits. Okay, so.
And scene.
Yeah, and there you go. Roll those traditional Japanese font credits. Okay, what did you think of this movie, Lorelei? I mean, just general feelings, impressions. Go ahead.
I like I said at the very beginning, I was just like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, especially when he refers to her as slant-eyed, right? Yeah. I was like, that is, can you get away with that? Like, that is crazy. Right. And it was just so racist at the beginning, yes. And I didn't know how it was going to come out of it.
Right.
And then I started having like weird feelings about Ricardo Montalban.
Like, oh yeah, those are justified feelings.
What? How? Okay. Hey. Okay. How did they decide that a Mexican was going to play a Japanese person, and also? Based on Flower Drum Song, which was what, like the next year, the year later, there's plenty of Asian actors. Like, I don't know why, who made that decision and why? Do you know anything about that?
You know, I truly do not. I was looking that up and I could not find in my limited research why that decision was made. I will say, I wish I could say that Joshua Logan was the last director to cast a Mexican as an Asian person, but it has happened as recently as 2014 when Jon Stewart cast, yes, that Jon Stewart, cast Gael Garcia Bernal as an Iranian man in Rosewater. I mean, he's definitely Iranian. Now, granted, I know it's not East Asian, but still, I'm just saying this thing hasn't, well, okay. Anyway, I'm saying Hollywood still has some work to do. So go ahead, but anyway.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Yeah, I mean, like, when was freaking Ghost in the Shell? That was like in the past 5 years, right?
Yes.
Like,
yes, right.
It's not. There's enough Asian actors out there,
there's
especially
plenty
now.
Yes. Yep. Oh yeah. But it is very strange. And you know, another weird thing about Montalban is he hadn't been in a movie in a couple of years, so I'm not, you know, like, I don't know what I would love to know more about that. And another thing about that role is it's kind of the only male Asian role in the movie. I mean, that has really any lines. So that it makes it kind of doubly like, wait, they've only got one male Asian role and they give it to a Mexican guy. I mean, and plus his, well, I want to say I would normally say he's playing it in yellow face. He's actually playing it in white face half the time because his face is caked with white makeup because of his job, right? But it's still kind of strange. And I was looking at his eyes really carefully because I kind of have small eyes too, but but no, they're definitely like a little pinched. You know, I noticed. I'm like, why do you pinch a guy's eyes when you get, as you're saying, Lorelei, you got all these great Asian actors lying around. I mean, yeah, okay. Anyway,
I mean, yeah, like what it stunned me. Like I was just like, how are you and I don't know if he's trying to do a Japanese accent. Like that was
that too.
Like, what was there were so many wrong things about it. And I don't know if it was just because is it just because he was in the studio system at the time and they were like, oh, he's available. But it just seemed really weird.
It is very weird. And his accent is very weird. Well, you know, he's the perfect foil to William Shatner because I never know what either of them are doing with their voices. So it's good that somebody thought to make them like hero versus villain because their voices are like, what's going on here? But anyway, yeah.
I did
yeah, any other thoughts?
I did like the big Busby Berkeley numbers, like, and
yeah,
that was something that I thought was interesting between a similarity between this and Flower Drum Song was like, we gotta have the big dance number. But I think that's also because like they're, you know, widescreen. They want to
absolutely that was a big part of it. You know, even though this wasn't a musical, you could see why they wanted to get a director of musicals like Joshua Logan because they really wanted that spectacle. They wanted, you know, the credited dancers are the Shochiku Kagedigan Girls Review. I'm saying it wrong. Kagedigan Girls Review, which was a competitor to Takaruzaka. I mean, Takaruzaka was sort of the original one. Which is interesting because I was like, wow, when did they form? Because I was sort of fascinated about that. And then my internet rabbit hole said that they they formed in the early 20th century as sort of a competition to kabuki, which was by then all male, but that at least some female critics find Takaruzaka still sort of overwhelmingly patriarchal, you know, set up for the male gaze, you know, controlled by men. I assumed, I mean, I can see that in this movie, absolutely. Sorry, so go ahead, Lorelei. Yeah, any other thoughts or thoughts?
No, I was just, oh, you know, you were asking me like if I saw any commonalities between all the different movies. And
yeah, go ahead.
I just remembered that one was, I thought it was interesting that these all came from pre-existing stories.
Right.
And like none of them were original screenplays.
No, although the Defiant Ones comes close to an original screenplay. It was kind of like, Stanley Kramer basically asked writers he knew, can we put together like a white guy and a black guy on a chain? But you know, I mean, so it was close to original. But yeah, you're right. But no, go ahead. Yeah, still, yeah.
And the other common theme was, you know, because it was the style of the time, but like all white male old directors, right? And
yes,
and them being the voice of all these different cultures and representations, and that seems wacky.
Well, I've mentioned on this podcast many times that the original AFI 100, the first one the American Film Institute did in 1997, was all white guys. Every director on it is a white male. And what's also interesting to me is that in the late 90s, when there were all these TV specials about that list, so you had, I mean, they were hosted by like Jodie Foster, Cher, you had Whoopi Goldberg, you had Halle Berry, you had Sam Jackson, all speaking. Like they would just interview them in the interstitial segments. They'll be like, oh, this is why blankety blank was like, oh, this is why Ben-Hur was great. Oh, this is why West Side Story was great, whatever. They would never, no one on any of those CBS specials ever said, hey, has anybody noticed that all 100 of these movies is directed by a white guy? I mean, it never came up. Now, it should have come up. For all I know, Samuel Jackson did say that and CBS cut it. I don't know. But I guess my point is that, it was just accepted as normal. Although I will get to how the guy who had directed A Raisin in the Sun on stage, Lloyd Richards, really should have been, I mean, that's he was a black guy. And if he had been allowed to direct that movie, you know, let me save that till later. But yes, it is, Yeah, I mean, why are we seeing Joshua Logan's version of this story? Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons it's even being made at all is that Japanese films are becoming bigger in America. So in other words, like the Seven Samurai is coming out, you know, there for the first time Americans are learning about, you know, Japanese films, and they could have hired, I mean, it wouldn't have been, but I can see why the studio is like, well, you know, I mean, I'm not saying it's right, but I get it that they didn't hire those people anyway, you know.
I love the idea of an alternate universe where they hired Kurosawa to make
sure. Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't know what Kurosawa would have done with this script. I'm not pretending it was perfect for him or anything. Excuse my cat. Is Sayonara an anti-racist film? I don't know.
I'm trying to think of like the era, and were people thinking anti-racist or racist back then, or were they just?
That's a good point. They kind of weren't. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that they were just like, this is how it is. And although when we get into Raisin in the Sun, then I guess we can talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
And I think people were thinking mostly of racist and anti-racist in terms of black and white for the most part.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah. Although, I mean, I would say this movie does confront some racism. I mean, maybe not, you know, obviously it's not going to do everything, but I mean, clearly the Colonel Clayford character is supposed to be kind of the bad guy. And I mean, my thing is like, did we have to have them both die? I mean, see, that's, I'm not them both. I meant, you know, Kelly and Katsumi. I mean, now granted, yeah, it kind of, it happens that way in the novel, but then why did Michener have to do it? It seems like there's a weird way in which, yes, it's confronting the Madame Butterfly stereotype of, you know, she kills herself, but and so granted, it ends a little better because they're going to go home together to America, which is better than than stealing the baby and letting her kill herself. It's better. It's an upgrade. But I don't know if it's enough of an upgrade. I mean, what do you think? Do you feel like this movie, you know, successfully confronted the Madame Butterfly stereotype, or kind of in some ways perpetuated it, or I don't know. You tell me.
I think it kind of perpetuated it. I mean, that's why she won the Oscar, right? Because she died gloriously.
That's a really good point. I'm really glad you say that. I mean, it feels like they're rewarding her for dying gloriously in a weird way, you know? Yeah. I get that.
One interesting thing for me is, as far as her Oscar and the Oscar for Parasite, is that like they're winning their Oscar for being very Asian, right?
Yes, right.
I'm looking forward to seeing an Asian actress win an Oscar for just being a regular old Asian American. Like, I think that would be
I totally, you know, it's funny you say that. I was gonna segue to that. Well, let's see, what did I have here? Yeah, okay, so what I was gonna say is, for the record, Sayonara was released in December 1957, the same month as The Bridge on the River Kwai, which wound up making many more roadshow engagements and becoming a much bigger hit and more of a must-see for movie fans to this day. Perhaps ironically, of the 8 Oscars The Bridge on the River Kwai was nominated for, the only one that it lost, it won 7 of 8, but the one it lost was for Sesue Hayakawa for Best Supporting Actor, instead of Hollywood taking the rare opportunity to thank Hayakawa for the 40, look that up, 40 silent films he had led, 40 silent films he starred in, almost as a genre unto himself. The Academy awarded red buttons for his role as Joe Kelly, alongside Miyoshi Umeki winning Best Supporting Actress for her role as Katsumi Kelly. So, but I do feel like Lorelei's right that they were somehow rewarded for, I mean, by twisted Oscar logic, their deaths helped them win those their on-screen deaths helped them, like, it was sort of like Oscar logic suggests that the Academy was sort of blessing their on-screen interracial marriage, but at the same time blessing the fact that it ended in mutual seppuku. I mean, I don't know, you know, like, or at least that's, I mean, it's weird, but it feels like it's sort of worked that way. And well, anyway, I mean, you can disagree with me and Lorelei about that. What you can't disagree with is Miyoshi Umeki became the first and only Asian woman to win an acting Oscar for more than 60 years until Yoon Yoo-jung won in 2021 for Minari. The only other Asian or Asian American to have won an acting Oscar was Hang S-Nagor in 1983 for The Killing Fields, meaning there have been exactly 3 acting winners in 93 years. As for Miyoshi Umeki, she moved on to a Tony nomination as one of the leads in the stage musical Flower Drum Song, which is a story I'll pick up when we discuss that in a few minutes. We've obviously already been alluding to that. But yeah, okay, so final thoughts about that. You know, I think here's how I'd react to what you just said. Here's what I think about the Madame Butterfly stereotype. I mean, on some level, Sayonara does confront it a little, but on another level, why can't we have, you know how you just said like an Asian American acting Asian? I mean, like, why can't we have soldiers, white soldiers, come to Japan and fall in love with, I don't know, a doctor, a lawyer, a business executive, instead of a woman who, you know, her job is to basically entertain men in some way, or to like be looked at, or just not take her clothes off, but, you know, perform in a way. I mean, like that, those are the only, you know, or just be a sort of a geisha. I mean, those are the only ones we've seen. So I feel like I mean, maybe, I'm sorry, I say those are the only ones we've seen. I have not seen every movie that has come out since 1957. So for all I know, there is a movie like the one I'm describing, but I don't know of it. So that, if you, please let me know in the comments if you know of a movie where a white guy goes to Japan and falls in love with like a doctor, like a female or a male doctor. That would be great too, you know, or something other than this, you know, that to me, that would be a little bit better of a confrontation of this stereotype, you know, I think. So yeah. Anything else before we sort of shove off of this film, Lorelei?
Not that I think I've ranted enough on that one.
Oh, please, you barely got started. By my standards of ranting. Okay, well, if you think of something later, we can always circle back.
All right.
Speaking of a genre unto himself, as I was about Sessue Hayakawa, consider Marlon Brando, who might have made almost any movie after he changed American acting with A Streetcar Named Desire and beat the other contenders for his Oscar for On the Waterfront. Of all the scripts he was sent, perhaps Brando thought it would be interesting to play Yellowface in a crazy accent in The Tea House of the August Moon, and then use a slow Southern drawl in Sayonara, which isn't in the script and wasn't, whatever. I described Sayonara as a pivot, and indeed it was, because Brando came home from Japan to found his own production company, Pennebaker, named for his recently deceased mother, avowedly to make films with, quote, social value that would improve the world, unquote. In 1961, in the only film Brando ever directed, One-Eyed Jacks, his lead character romances a Mexican woman. Next year, Brando made Mutiny on the Bounty, where his lead character romances a Polynesian woman far more conspicuously than Clark Gable had done in the 1935 version. The next year, Brando marched with Martin Luther King in several places, including the August 1963 March on Washington. 10 years after that, he sent Sachin Little Feather to pick up his Oscar for The Godfather, while bringing attention to ongoing oppression of Native American rights. I would say that episode summarized Brando's allyship really well. He was both sincere and lazy. He meant it, and he also didn't feel like showing up for half of the things he could have done. Anyway.
Like his role in Superman.
Oh yeah. Brando formed his social values-based production company at the same time he was saying no to Stanley Kramer's latest idea for social values, a script called The Defiant Ones. 2 podcasts ago, I explained Kramer's early career making social problem films and how that career got derailed when his writing partner Carl Foreman was blacklisted by the House on Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC. This was around the time Kramer produced The Wild One, a 1953 film starring Marlon Brando as a rebel against society that served to mainstream things like leather jackets, blue jeans, and motorcycle gangs. America hadn't seen much of any of those prior to that film. However, Brando and Kramer failed to get along on set. They didn't like each other. And 4 years later, Brando told Kramer he couldn't wait for Sidney Poitier to become available to make The Defiant Ones. After 5 years of middlebrow melodrama, after McCarthyist anti-communism came to look less important than civil rights, Kramer was determined to restart a more social value conscious career by casting Poitier. He needed Poitier. He felt he did, and he was right, I think. With Brando out, Kramer cast Tony Curtis, whom UA, United Artists, considered a big enough star to put his name above the title, Curtis's. However, Curtis insisted that Poitier share that honor, marking the very first time that Sidney Poitier's name had appeared above the title of any film. As I said 2 podcasts ago, terrible of me, Bahamian American Sidney Poitier broke through during the heyday of the social problem film as a young doctor in Daryl Zanuck's No Way Out. After 2 or 3 little-seen films, Poitier broke through again at the age of 28 as the leading high school student rebel in The Blackboard Jungle. Poitier next made several interesting films, including The Mark of the Hawk, where he stars as an African named Obama, that did not do especially well with critics or audiences until The Defiant Ones, based on a story by Nedrick Young and Harold Jacob Smith that Stanley Kramer, supervised, produced, and directed during the winter of 1958. The Defiant Ones was not made with CinemaScope-style photography like Sayonara, partly because it was shot in a Southern California that looks nothing like the South it's supposed to be, in case you had, I bet you noticed, Lorelei. Partly because, you know, the whole black and white thing, and partly because, well, because the film stock is black and white, which underlines the theme, and partly because Sam Levitt's jittery camera work feels true, I think, to the nervous main characters, as well as years ahead of most of what Hollywood was then doing. It was not common to have the way there's several shots happen with the camera moving around a lot while keeping the characters in frame. You didn't see much of that at the time. Without that shaky organic camera, I would argue that the chain between the 2 main characters would come to look like an overemphasized metaphor. Instead, I would argue that one forgets about the metaphor. What do you think of that, Lorelei? I mean, just before now I want to summarize the plot, but do you think, I mean, were you watching this thinking, boy, that metaphor is so creaky and stupid? Or were you more like me, where you're like, you know, I got into this and I kind of forgot about that dumb metaphor. You know, it was working so well, I thought. I mean, what did you think?
Wait, the metaphor of the black and white, or the metaphor of
of a black and white man chained together, you know, facing off against the world. I mean, clearly, I think that's a metaphor for America in some sense, or the American problems, or whatever. I mean, I think it's a creaky metaphor, but I also think I kind of forgot about it while I was watching the movie, which I think is part of the power. What did you think?
It's funny because it did start off that way, but I thought it was really nice that they got to that accident like super immediately, like within the first 5 minutes.
I love that too. Yes.
Now we're going to kick off the story, and now we're going to get into the relationship of the characters.
Right.
And once they started diving into that, then the metaphors and everything sort of went past, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be able to get into the story now.
Yep. Well, let me talk about how that happens, if it's okay. Hey, speaking of, The Defiant Ones begins on a rainy southern night in a prison transfer truck where Noah Cullen sings Long Gone from Bowling Green to a warning from the driver and from a fellow prisoner, Joker, who names Noah not Noah, but another N-word. Inciting Noah to threaten Joker just as a fruit jalopy nearly collides with the prison truck and runs it off the road. Police draw together deputies, dogs, and designs on how to get the only 2 escapees, though one notes the warden chained them together because of his sense of humor and quotes that warden that these 2 will kill each other before they go 5 miles. Cullen and Joker try to break the chain connecting their wrists, but failing that, they argue where to get it off, when they'll brutally tangle, and which way to run, with Cullen winning with his plan for them to run 60 miles north to catch a train to Ohio. Cullen and Joker kill and eat a frog, argue over Joker's racism and vocabulary, and get caught in a cloudburst in a clay pit that they must work painfully together to finally escape, though Joker's wrist gets infected. Cullen and Joker arrive at night at a general store with food and tools, wait as the local work village residents go to bed, and bond over makers and takers, as well as pre-prison practices, prejudices, and pretending to be Charlie Potatoes. This comes up a lot. Cullen says Joker's face shines, quote, like a full moon, unquote, smears mud on it, and says now only the meanness shines through, inducing Joker to declare, then we sure look alike. Cullen and Joker sneak into the general store via the roof, screw up, pound out loud sounds, wake up the camp, smash through the window, run, and get caught by the camp's men who threaten to string them up as Joker protests, quote, you can't lynch me, I'm a white man, unquote. One man, Big Sam, breaks up the mob, orders the prisoners tied up for the night, claims he'll drive them to the police in the morning, but later cuts them loose as they see his wrists chain gang scar. With Joker and Cullen barreling through the brambles, tensions boil over into a brawl until a boy, Billy, points a gun at Cullen but gets buffaloed and bonked unconscious. Cullen seizes the gun, refuses to let Joker leave Billy, and wakes the kid, who runs to the side of Joker, assumes Joker is chaperoning a prisoner, and tells them he was hunting alone because he lives alone on a large farm with his mom. Cullen and Joker chaperone the kid home, where Billy's mom gives them food and information about the next day's train. Billy brings a hammer and chisel for Cullen and Joker to finally break their chains, but Joker collapses from fever. This is the part I didn't understand why, Cullen waited, but let's talk about that later. Sheriff Max grills the Turpentine camp workers because he can see the escaped cons didn't bust themselves out of this camp, but gets nothing from Sam, the workers, or his deputies and dog handlers, really. At Billy's, after Cullen falls asleep, this is what I don't get, Billy's mom seizes the gun and wakes a shirtless Joker as the two warily share dreams and nightmares. In the morning, Joker wakes, takes the gun, learns there's a busted car, fixes it, and listens to her plan for the two of them to leave her kid at her brother's while they escape as a couple to southern cities. When Cullen overhears all this, she says they'll be less conspicuous apart, these two cons, and directs Cullen through the swamp to the 1 o'clock train, to which he gradually agrees to departing. Joker keeps asking Billy's mom why she's so sure Cullen won't be caught until she admits Cullen will die in the boggy swamp because she wanted to keep him from giving them away. Joker flips out on her that she doesn't even know who he is, meaning he, Joker, pushes her away from the door, gets shot in the shoulder by Billy, escapes, careens into the swamp calling Cullen, catches up to him, and accompanies him around the bog, where they see a train torpidly moving across a trestle. Cullen jumps onto the train, reaches a hand back for Joker, sees the wounded Joker, can't quite make it, holds his hand, and in one of cinema's most famous moments, Cullen jumps off the train rather than be separated from Joker. As Cullen holds onto Joker on the hill, they see the bloodhounds coming, and Cullen sings Long Gone again, not stopping even a little bit as Sheriff Max approaches these not so defiant ones. Okay, Lorelei, what do you think of this film? What stands out as unique about it? I don't know. Feelings?
I really liked it. Actually, one of the things that really stood out to me was there any soundtrack music to it? Or was it all diegetic with just the radio?
You know, that's a great question. I got to go back and look because you've definitely got Poitier singing, assuming that is his voice, which I actually couldn't figure out if he was lip syncing or not. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a really, if it is scored, it's underscored in the.
Yeah, it's totally underscored, because what really stood out to me was during the scene when they're in the river and they're getting dragged down the river. Yeah, there was like no music, and it was really apparent to me. And then I thought it was funny that the sheriff kept yelling at the dude with the radio. And so that made me think about the radio, and I was like, oh, I think that's the only music in this whole thing.
Right. And here's the sheriff trying to shut it up.
Yeah. I'd have to go back and watch it again, because it didn't occur to me until like halfway through the movie.
You know, that's a really great point that I hadn't thought about at all, but I think that's I think that might add to the movie's power. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. It just made it feel more sort of like in its place, you know? And one other question I had was, it was really hard to find this streaming.
Yes.
And is it because they consider that the mud on Tony Curtis as some kind of blackface?
Oh, wow. You know, I have but there must be other blackface films that aren't that hard to find streaming. So I can't imagine that's why, but I don't know.
There was a whole purge like a couple of years ago, right?
Oh, well, I didn't know that. I gotta say, it's some of the least convincing blackface. I mean, he's still, you can.
It was terrible.
There's mud on his face, that's clear, but he's hardly, he's not Al Jolson, the jazz singer. I mean, he doesn't look like, I mean, honestly, if you're trying to camo your way into a camp like Martin Sheen at the end of Apocalypse Now, you kind of should try to actually look darker than he does, if that makes any sense,
Yeah, no, actually, before he put the mud on his face, I was like, man, Tony Curtis is really white. Like, he's a shiny dude.
kind of a shiny dude, and yet he emerges here as civil rights hero. No, he doesn't. But at least he was cool to put Sidney Poitier's name with his on the title, above the title. I mean, that probably helped them both get nominated for the Best Actor Oscar, because that doesn't happen every year, and it had never happened. There had never been a black Best Actor nominee. This was the first. So I don't want to give Curtis too much credit. I mean, but maybe his allyship helped a little bit there.
Yeah, but also Poitier is like amazing. So
right. Okay, that's a much bigger factor. Yes. No, obviously you like to think they don't nominate them unless there's some good acting there. Yeah, but yes, right, for sure. Anything else? Any other thoughts about this movie?
I didn't like the representation of the cuckoo bananas lady. Like, she was cuckoo and bananas all the way through, and like it seemed like she was going to be cool, and then you're realizing, oh, he's way better off with Cullen.
Yeah,
like this is not going to end well.
Yeah, it's kind of not great that the only female character in the movie is like, I need a man, I'm just sitting here waiting for the next man to show up and run this farm. And also I'll take the next white con that comes along, and let's get rid of the black con as quickly as we can. I mean, yeah, like there's a lot of things. If there were 3 other women in the movie that you noticed and that weren't like shoved aside by old Sam at the turpentine camp, maybe.
Oh, right.
Or one of the cops. I mean, I know it's the 50s in the South. There's probably not 100 female cops out there, but I'm just saying. I mean, yeah, it's not great when the only female character is kind of. Let's just say I agree with you. Yeah.
That's when it turned a little sour for me, because I was totally getting into it, and then she just turned out to be this like crazy lady.
Well, right. And I get why they needed that foil. And in a way, it made sense if we are in the South, that like there wouldn't be 100, homes where people, yeah, come here, black guy, and, take all my food, and here's the gun. And, I mean, I get that probably wouldn't happen. So I get it. But it also, yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Anything else?
What? I thought that the camera work was really interesting. That did stand out to me. Like the dolling around them while they were like tied together.
Yep, that shot jumped out to me too. And there was more than just that one. I mean, their fight was good. Their little. Yeah. I mean, there were, honestly, it's weird because if you look at Stanley Kramer's other films, there's not much of this. I mean, and I think there's actually more music. So if we were to go check out Judgment at Nuremberg, or his films even before this and after. I mean, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? There's nothing like this, So I don't know if it was, I mean, what I'm impressed with is that Kramer was trying to reestablish himself as a director, and yet he seemed to understand that even when, I mean, because there weren't a lot of films like Godard, Breathless style, there weren't jittery, he didn't have 100 examples of, I know I keep saying 100, but it's true. He didn't have 100 examples of like jittery, so I actually, and I think that, I do think the camera work really, really helps this movie. It makes it feel more vital, more urgent. I think what it does is it makes us care more about Cullen and Joker as like in an urgent life sort of existential crisis situation. In a way, I could see how like we'd be a little more arm's length about it if the camera like never moved, if that makes any sense.
It was more static, yeah, because it would feel like it would feel too much like a stage play or something.
Yeah. So actually, I'm very impressed with it, and it really elevates the stakes, is what I'd say. And it differs from most of Kramer's other films. I wish he had done this, honestly, in more of his in films like Inherit the Wind. Because when you're watching Inherit the Wind, which is about the Scopes trial, you got a bunch of lawyers yelling at things, which is fine. But this kind of camera work that Sam Levitt does in this movie would have served that story better. I mean, or at least a little more often.
Yeah. I was wondering if they were trying to make it more dynamic, because it seemed like it was just so focused on dialogue, right? Because it's just the two of them, right?
Right. Sure. Yeah. But, and especially like when they did share a long dialogue scene, like when they're at the turpentine camp and it's dark and they're waiting, that's when the camera moved a lot, like, and just changed angles and things. And I thought, this is great, because it really keeps you watching it, and it makes it matter more when like Cullen is like explaining, like I remember Joker asks him, like, did you want to kill that white guy that you got put in prison for? He didn't kill him. And he's like, maybe. And the maybe feels just more vital because I'm not really sure like because the camera work's just changed, and we're now seeing the left side of Poitier's face, and it's kind of like, this is good. You know, I'm saying it works. I think that part actually holds up really. I think for modern audiences, I mean, I like to think, I don't know, can you show this movie to modern audiences? Lorelei, is this movie going to hold up? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. Well, they did the remake, right? Which I didn't see, with Carl Weathers. And
yeah, I didn't see that either.
6 or something. And then, I mean, I'd be interested to see the 86 one, to see how they,
right.
Even though that was forever ago.
There've been a lot of influences. You know, there've been cartoons that have done this. They did a female version sort of in the 70s. I mean, yeah, this is not a movie that people don't know about. You know, it didn't just come out and become obscure. I mean, you know,
right.
So yeah.
Right. Except you can't find it on streaming.
Well, that's interesting too. Yeah, sorry about that. Well, you know, Porgy and Bess, which was Poitier's next film, is a lost film. Like literally, there's no print. There may not be a print of it anywhere. There's nobody, and it may be the most expensive lost film of all time, because it had like a $4 million budget. So It's weird that there's no prints anywhere of it. You know, like nobody. Yeah. Anyway, so if you think Defiant Ones is hard to find, now I don't know what is it, because Sidney Poitier's films in the 50s. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, I wouldn't have put this on the C list if I didn't think there was any way for you to find it. I knew you'd get there eventually, just like I did, you know? But thank you for doing that extra research to get there. Let me throw out a couple other things about the Defiant Ones. It was released in September 1958, became a hit. It surprised United Artists by playing in some Southern theaters, which is something they didn't know they'd get. The Defiant Ones was nominated for 9 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and as I already said, Best Actor nominations for both Curtis and Poitier. And Poitier's was a breakthrough. I mean, we needed, some Black man had to be the first one nominated for Best Actor.
Yeah, totally.
They both, Curtis and Poitier, lost to David Niven in Separate Tables, a movie nobody knows about today. The film won, yeah, exactly. The film won 2 Oscars for things Lorelei and I have already mentioned: Sam Levitt's camera work, and for the script by Harold Jacob Smith and Nathan E. Douglas. That's what it said in the original credits, which was on Oscar night corrected to his real non-blacklist name, Nedrick Young. He was a blacklisted screenwriter. Hedda Hopper, still trying to be relevant, claimed, she wrote in, I guess, the LA Times, wherever she was working in the 50s, claimed that now that Oscars were being awarded to known communists, she knew several patriotic Oscar winners who were going to give them back. Well, I'm glad you're shaking your head, Lorelei, because nobody did. This wasn't like Tom Cruise handing his Golden Globes back. Literally nobody. After Hopper said that, absolutely no. She said, oh, I know lots of patriotic Oscar winners who are going to give theirs back. Yeah, she didn't know anyone like that, or at least no one who did it. So that whole blacklist thing, I mean, yeah, so this was one more movie that did help to poke holes in that whole blacklist who-act stuff, you know. I also want to say that, I mean, when you look at the Defiant Ones screenplay and Shaky Cam today, maybe they both look a little too shaky, or maybe they don't hold up, but I do think they moved Hollywood, you know, when a movie wins an Oscar, it helps move Hollywood towards scripts and shots that maybe hold up a little better these days. But yeah, after the Defiant Ones reestablished his reputation as an effective and socially conscious director-producer, Kramer made 3 defiant films in the next 3 years, namely On the Beach, Inherit the Wind, and Judgment at Nuremberg. By the time of his Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was already in the AFI 100, Kramer was Hollywood's premier activist director. Of course, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner also inadvertently demonstrated how many more anti-racist voices were needed, but that's a story for another podcast. So after Poitier's next couple of projects, including the Porgy and Bess for Otto Preminger that I just told you is lost forever, he focused on a play that needed him as much as he needed it. The success of The Defiant Ones helped the play's producer, Philip Rose, secure financing for this risky, all-Black play that took its name from Langston Hughes's 1951 poem Harlem, sometimes called A Dream Deferred, which is worth reading in full. I'm going to just read this poem right now. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? I love that poem. That's the first poem that's ever been in this podcast. Maybe it'll be the last. I don't know. Thanks for putting up with it. Playwright Lorraine Hansberry borrowed her play's title from Hughes, but much of the play's story from her life. Hansberry was born in 1930 in Chicago, where Lorraine's father, Carl Hansberry, moved her family when she was 8 from a poor Black neighborhood in Chicago into the white enclave, Washington Park in Chicago. Their new white neighbors worked so hard to get her family out that the case went all the way to the US Supreme Court, where African-American civil rights attorney Earl B. Dickerson successfully argued in Hansberry versus Lee, 1940, that a litigant like Carl Hansberry couldn't be bound by previous civil action. This was merely a step on the way to the Supreme Court in 1948, finding racially restrictive covenants to be unconstitutional, but it was an important step that brought a young Lorraine Hansberry into contact with prominent Black leaders of the 40s like W.E.B. Du Bois, Jesse Owens, the Urban League, and Paul Robeson, whose magazine Freedom Hansberry began writing for in 1951. Lorraine Hansberry's work combined journalism and activism for civil disobedience, resisting oppression, however necessary, and particularly female-led causes and revolutions against white supremacy and imperialism. In 1953, when she was 23, Hansberry married Jewish Robert Nemiroff, but they divorced in 1957, around the time Hansberry contributed 2 pseudonymous letters to The Ladder, America's brand new and first avowedly lesbian publication run by the Daughters of Bilitis. After the tremendous success a couple years later of A Raisin in the Sun, Hansberry gradually felt more comfortable coming out of the closet, taking lovers and vacations in LGBT-friendly places. Very tragically, Hansberry died in 1965 at the age of 34 of pancreatic cancer. James Baldwin wrote, quote, "It is not at all far-fetched to suspect that what she saw contributed to the strain which killed her, for the effort to which Lorraine was dedicated is more than enough to kill a man," unquote. I'm sure he didn't mean that in a double standard man-woman way. I'm sure Baldwin was cool. Almost as tragically, Nemiroff inherited all of her writings, that ex-husband, and he suppressed any of it that favored homosexuality. So that part of Hansberry's life only came to light with their daughter's help in 2013. Any reflection on the life and legacy of Lorraine Hansberry, though, begins with A Raisin in the Sun, her play. The official poster hung at Broadway's Ethel Barrymore Theater and was altered about 2 weeks before the play's debut on March 11, 1959, to now read Academy Award nominee Sidney Poitier. I mean, of course, you're going to put that on the poster if you can. That's only going to help business. A Raisin in the Sun was the first Broadway-produced play to be written by a Black woman or directed by a Black person, namely Lloyd Richards, who I mentioned earlier. And Richards called it the first play to draw Black audiences in large numbers. I don't know if he's right about that. That's what he said. Outside of musicals, A Raisin in the Sun was the first time most Broadway audiences had seen an all African-American cast. That's something else. The New York Drama Critics Circle later named it, they named it the best play of 1959, and it was nominated for all the major Tonys. Later audiences and reviewers would reckon Raisin as one of the best and most influential plays of the century. None of this assured that A Raisin in the Sun would be made into a Hollywood movie, because the story was somewhat confined. Hansberry and Poitier demanded that the movie feature all of the unknown actors who starred on Broadway, and Hansberry wanted to use the ability to shoot exteriors to show the ugly character of both miscreants in the younger's current neighborhood and the white busybodies in their new neighborhood. Columbia Pictures did not want to show either, and so neither did get shown. Columbia Pictures rejected Hansberry's first 2 drafts, forced Poitier to star in 2 other films, limited the budget to $1.5 million, and finally, and we kind of got to this already, required its own director, Daniel Petrie, a white man with mostly TV credits. Now, I'll say, Lorelei, this podcast does not do what ifs, partly because it's painful to imagine the amazing work that the play's original director, Lloyd Richards, might have brought to cinema over the next 3 decades had he been given his due in 1961. But yeah, totally. What we have instead is the poignant, precious, non-puerile 2 hours of the motion picture, A Raisin in the Sun. Can I describe that movie's plot, and then I'll ask you what you thought? Does that sound good? Plot and thought? Here we go. A Raisin in the Sun begins in a cramped apartment on Chicago's South Side with the 7:30 alarm that awakens Ruth Younger, who awakens her son Travis and her husband Walter, who complains about the shared hall bathroom, scrambled eggs, Ruth's looks, and the timing of a life insurance check for $10,000 to be delivered to his mother. After sending Travis off with more money than the kid should have, Walter tells Ruth about Willie, Bobo, and himself coming up with $10,000 each to start a liquor store. But Ruth saying, "Eat your eggs," leads to his lecture about how the colored woman refuses to build up the colored man. Benitha, Walter's sister, wakes to a lecture from Walter that becoming a doctor is too expensive and Benny should instead become a nurse or get married like other women. Without words, we watch Walter work as a chauffeur. Lena, Walter's mother, meddles with the way Ruth's raising Travis, partly by repeating, "I ain't meddling." She says she's not meddling by saying that. Ruth advises Lena to use her husband's life insurance money to have a ball in Europe or South America like a rich white woman. But Lena makes Ruth laugh when she says, "Something always told me I ain't no rich white woman." When Ruth says she's thinking of setting part of the windfall aside for Benitha's medical school, in part for a down payment on a 2-story house, Ruth says she regards their current flat as a rat trap, causing Lena to look back on acquiring the place and other memories with the just departed Big Walter, quoting him with tears in his eyes, quote, "Seems like God didn't see fit to give the black man nothing but dreams, but he did give us children to make them dreams seem worthwhile," unquote. Benny enters, brags about her date with George, and argues with her mother about flitting versus experimenting, and Benny's avowed atheism, which prompts Lena to slap her daughter across the face and force her to repeat, quote, "In my mother's house, there is still God," unquote. After Benny bounces, Ruth bids to persuade Lena that colored people need to take chances and move forward, but Lena won't let Big Walter's legacy be left to a liquor store, and Ruth faints. In a bar, when Willie and Bobo warn Walter they'll need the money by Friday, Walter answers that he's got 3 women at the barricades, and we all know how hard it is to get women to see the bigger picture. When Benny mentions a caller from Nigeria, Lena confuses it with Liberia and claims she donates to missionary work only to save souls, inducing Benny to interject that real Africans need salvation from foreigners on their lands. Ruth returns to reveal to Lena and Benny that she's pregnant. Benny at first freaks out, then shoves an ailing Ruth into the next room because of the arrival of Asagai, who brings her African records in an African dress, touches her face, and charms Benny by saying, quote, "This is not so much the profile of a Hollywood queen as, say, the Queen of the Nile," unquote. Lena enters, meets Asagai, surprisingly repeats Benny's general critique regarding Africa, invites Asagai back for home-cooked meals, and hears him explain on his way out that his nickname for Benny, Alayo, means, quote, "one for whom food is not enough," unquote. Travis brings the $10,000 check upstairs to his grandma, who inhales hard and says if it wasn't for the family, she might give it up to the church. Walter enters, fingers the check, and shows Lena paperwork that she crumples up, causing Walter to comment he just wants to do better than Big Walter did so that she and Ruth don't have to sneak off and be servants to families. As Walter threatens to leave, Ruth says she wants to come with to tell him something. But when Walter blows her off, Ruth closes herself in their bedroom as Lena presses Walter on why he's become so materialist. Lena stops Walter from leaving by telling him that Ruth is pregnant and may well be seeing the wrong person about it. And when Ruth opens the door to their bedroom to say she just gave the abortionist a $5 deposit, Lena wants to witness Walter be the man his father was and testify to giving children life, not destroying them. Yet Walter does no more than depart desultorily. Later, Benny rejects assimilation by changing Ruth's pop record to tribal drums that she and Walter groove to, until George walks in and hypothesizes Benny's next harangue about heritage. Walter doesn't want to hear anything from Ruth, so she says they're broken and she should finish what she started with the specialist. Lena, though, shares the news that she used the money to buy a 3-bedroom house in Clybourne Park, a white neighborhood, to Ruth's euphoria and Walter's dysphoria. When Lena asks Walter to say she, quote, "done the right thing," unquote, he says she butchered his dream and walks out. Later, after a phone caller tells Ruth that Walter hasn't been to work in 3 days, Lena goes to the kitty cat, finds Walter drinking and drunk, hears him ask why she didn't give him the same chance she gave herself when she left the South 40 years before, and then she haltingly hands him her remaining $6,500, while telling him to put $3,000 away for Benny's medical school, to use the rest however he sees fit, to become the man of the house, and to believe she never stopped loving or trusting him. The Youngers visit the nice house and give Lena gardening gifts and boxes, including from Travis, a tutti frutti straw hat. This made me think of Carmen Miranda, which Lena loves, but Benny laments by saying, well, we were going for Mrs. Miniver, not Scarlett O'Hara. Thought that was an interesting line. Back at home, Walter and Ruth rumba to a jazz record and to reconciliation as Walter reproaches Benny for reading race into everything. Mark Lindner, the white leader of Clybourne Park's welcoming committee, comes calling for Lena, posits that problems only come when people can't talk them out, often says, you people, explains that the community is prepared to buy back the house at a profit to the Youngers, and gets bounced out, braying as he beats it, quote, you can't change what's in people's hearts, unquote. Bobo arrives in tears, explaining finally that Willie skipped town with all of their money, and after he's gone, Lena makes fists and speaks of how hard Big Walter worked year in and year out for his son to give away all of it in one day. Later, Asagai arrives, hears Benny's bluster of blame, defends Lena, and proposes to Benny that she come with him to Nigeria. Whoa. Ruth keeps packing, but Lena stops her, suggests canceling the movers, and speaks some lovely improvements for the house. Walter walks in with a windy speech about takers, getting tooken, the way the world is, and everyone preparing to put on a show for the man. Yes, the man, in this case, Mark Lindner of Clybourne Park. When Lindner arrives, Lena tells her son to show his son what 5 generations of toil have come to. And so Walter hesitates, but finally refuses the money from Lindner because the Youngers are moving into Clybourne Park. The movers arrive and start moving things as Lena says Walter, quote, found his manhood today, unquote, and allows herself a long, last reflective look at the apartment. Okay, so I've been mansplaining for many minutes. Lorelei, what do you think? Does this hold up? What's most interesting about it? Thoughts, feelings?
One thing that I really liked about it is that I've always thought of Raisin in the Sun as a Poitier movie, right?
Yeah,
like it's
sure.
like it's his, but it felt more ensemble than that.
Yeah.
Like I was really interested in everybody's story.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to see, I wanted to go down the rabbit hole of every single character, which I thought was really interesting. And
yeah, I mean, especially the mom. I mean, the mom, Claudia McNeil does great work in this, you know, the mom. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree, all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I loved the mom's relationship. Like I love the mother relationships that were happening there. There was just so much, it was so rich. There was just so much that I wanted to dive into. And yet it was still so simple. I thought it was interesting that you were saying that the director had previously just done television, because it did feel very TV. And I don't know if it's because it was like, it felt like very Twilight Zone to me because they had the Twilight Zone guy in it.
You know, it did feel, I think you could call it respectful would be the one word to use, his camera work or his general style, like trying not to hurt the material by doing too many crazy things with the camera. But I also agree.
Super crazy thing. There was like this one shot where it's like, it's a pretty long shot and it starts off, it's a wide.
Yeah.
And then it goes to a close up on the check.
Yes.
Like it goes to a close up on his face, and then it goes close up on his neck, and then it goes back to wide.
There were a few little ones. Yeah. So I thought, yeah, I agree. I almost felt like I could sense Daniel Petrie's stage fright, like that he didn't want to screw this up, you know?
Right.
Right. Which is okay. I mean, you know, it did get a lot. I have seen this play actually performed, and I think that they got a lot of it. I mean, what's impressive is how much of it survives. Yes, they have, of course, any movie has to cut a few things, but most of it is in there. And I think it's respectful enough. I think if you're saying that you wanted to see more from each character, that to me, that's a compliment to something. I don't know if it's the director, the writer. I mean, I don't know, but that to me, that's a great compliment to say about anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was really compelling. I really liked it. And I thought it was interesting that there was the theme of the takers.
Well, did you notice they had met that Joker and Cullen had also talked about that? So
totally.
I thought, yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting that sort of carried over. So I'd be curious to know what the dialogue of takers was back in that time.
Yeah, right.
It seems like it was a theme of some
Well, exactly. And then we later found that the 2012 election was like about that, or like, Mitt Romney was trying to base it on the takers versus the makers, and you people are the makers, and yeah, well, that didn't work out so well for him, but it is a rhetorical strain that we see in American culture. Yeah, and I do think that was interesting that was in two of these very important Sidney Poitier projects. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anything else?
It was interesting for me to hear Benny talk about like the assimilation, like all the assimilation junk.
Yep.
Because that's actually a conversation that's happening in the Asian American community right now, right?
Right. Go ahead.
Because, we've always been told like, you got to assimilate. That's going to get you through all of this. And it's turning out to be not so true.
Right.
So it was interesting to see that as a dialogue back in 1961 for the African American community.
I got the feeling like Benny, based on what I read about Hansberry's life, was probably the closest to her, where she felt she also, was very tempted by sort of like, or not tempted might be the wrong word, very interested in African culture, just in a lot of ways, which, these other characters might not have been, yeah. Anything else?
No, I mean, there was a lot. Also, there was a lot I was thinking about, so I could probably go on for a while. But the one thing I was wondering, like, can you buy a single family 3-bedroom home for?
Oh my God, they're $3,500. How is that even possible? Well, I guess it was a down payment, but even then, I don't know. Yeah, I guess so maybe it was 10%, which means the whole thing cost $35,000. That's not that crazy. I've heard, I know we live in one of the most expensive parts of America, the Bay Area, and I did hear that actually houses around here, like in the suburbs, did go for like 35,000 in the 60s, so maybe that's not that crazy. Yeah, or 50,000 maybe.
No, I didn't understand why the houses in the white neighborhoods were cheaper than the houses in the black neighborhoods.
That seemed like a strange thing to mention, although maybe the point is that Black people are punished when they try, like the bar to Black home ownership is intentionally raised higher, whereas like, because white power structure wants to keep Black people as renters. So, maybe I couldn't tell, but I also noticed that line. That was interesting too. Yes.
It made me want to dive into the history of, Black home ownership, like, because it seemed interesting to me.
Yeah. I like, for me, I thought that there were just so many little things in this movie that I just think don't happen outside of an all-Black film, which almost feel like accidental is a strong word for a movie and a play that had been on for a year. But like, and what I mean is like, okay, like at one time Ruth calls Benny Miss Thing. I don't know that anybody calling anyone else Miss Thing had happened in a movie until 1961. There's another part where Ruth says, talks about the money and says it ain't got nothing to do with me. That expression, I got nothing to do with me. I'm not sure that was in again, these aren't accident. I'm calling them accidental. But what I'm trying to get at, Lorelei, is I felt like this movie was like giving us this actual Black culture like that. Not all the time. Yes, it's a play. Yes, it's artificial. I get all that. But there were just all kinds of things happening in this movie that just don't happen outside of an all-Black movie, which they're basic outside of musicals. There hadn't really been one in Hollywood history. This was, distributed by Columbia Pictures. This was a Hollywood film. So that is just really, it touches me. I guess I find it beautiful, if that makes any sense,
Yeah, no, I felt that it was like watching it, I was thinking, wow, this was definitely influential to many Black filmmakers going forward, because you can see the influences in movies today from this movie. And I thought, and I was surprised that I had never seen this movie before. I know about it. I was grateful to have the opportunity to see it now. So thank you.
Oh, not at all. Well, I wanted to address, so Sarita Cannon, in her essay about the film, African American woman, her essay in Criterion, she says, quote, "Some 21st century viewers may chafe at the film's focus on triumphant masculinity. It also includes Walter's comment to Beneatha as the family leaves their apartment for the last time that he will decide whom she marries. but this also underscores the limited opportunities for asserting Black manhood within a racist and materialist patriarchy, unquote. I think Sarita Kata does a great job trying to justify, the last 5 minutes, yeah, it is a little sexist. I mean, but I don't know, in context of everything and the way the world was in the 50s, I don't know that it's crazy. I mean, I don't know. Were you cringing when Lena said Walter found his manhood today? Or what was your thought when you heard that?
I kind of got the impression that the mom was just relieved, right?
Yeah.
Like that she was just like, okay, I am tired of being the head of this family. Can I hand it off now?
Right.
That was the impression that I got.
Great point, I think. Yeah. By the way, I just want to also recommend Sarita Cannon's whole essay about this movie. All you have to do is type her name into and Google Criterion. It's free. But anyway, because she really talks about all how intersectional this is, how Hansberry is drawing attention to gender, class, generational tensions, like the one you just mentioned, Lorelei. Just a lot of things. Being specific, but also general about Black people, that whole tension of like, okay, but is this just something that would only happen in the South Side of Chicago, or could this have also happened in other places to other people, maybe even to non-Black people? So those are interesting. I find that sort of thing fascinating. Actually, I'm glad you just mentioned about the assimilationist thing with Asian Americans, because I think this movie does, it's working on all that. This story is aware of all those difficulties. It's not pretending it's going to solve every problem in 2 hours. No, but also it's not naive about them. And I think it really is striking, I think, in so many ways. I consider it a great film. I do consider this one of the great films. I think it's an absolute outrage that this isn't on the AFI 100 or whatever, or doesn't usually come up in, like, let's say the IMDb top 250 or whatever. There's all kinds of lists out there. There's so many lists.
And you're making one too.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, I know, but that's why I'm doing it, because hey, in the land of the list makers, the one-eyed man is king. Well, I guess what I'm saying, I wish they weren't blind to a movie like this. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Right.
No, I really think this is something. Maybe one reason that they don't think of this movie more often when they're making their little lists is that the film was nominated for 0 Oscars, which also makes me wonder how many Academy members bothered to see an all-Black film that had no singing in it, or almost no singing. I kind of think they weren't. I could be wrong, but I suspect that the almost all-white Academy probably just didn't see it, But right. I want to be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but
right. Well, that's why I'm grateful that the Academy is at least trying to get some diversity in the ranks, right?
Well, right. Well, it's the context of this list coming out on these podcasts is that they just made a big announcement about their rule change that, like, their movies won't even be eligible anymore for Best Picture or whatever unless they, tick certain boxes, which I think are good, actually. Okay, but anyway, that's another podcast. I don't want to get, but yes, nobody ever said the Oscars were perfect. But it's a good thing that they're trying. You also sort of mentioned, well, you said this was an influential movie, Raising the Sun. One influence I would just want to quickly mention, after TV began mining film dramas for sitcoms, for example, MASH, Happy Days, Alice, Norman Lear developed a show called Good Times, which is set in a Chicago housing project. Now, I want to quickly rush to say, Good Times is not directly based on A Raisin in the Sun. Nobody paid Hansberry's estate royalties, but it's still unimaginable without it. And this groundbreaking showcase of Black poverty is part of Hansberry's legacy. It's part of it,
Yeah.
Anything else that we should discuss before moving on to film number 4 today?
Oh, we're on 4 now.
You're like, time. No, it's fine. We'll work it out somehow. Go ahead.
No, let's do it. Let's go to 4.
Sidney Poitier's career during the civil rights movement deserves more of your attention than just these 2 movies that Lorelei and I discussed today. But as I've said on the podcast many, many times, this C-list is an introduction, not a catalog. One way of summarizing Sidney's significance comes from Benshoff and Griffin, quote, Poitier's dignified persona perfectly fit the passive resistance strategy of the African-American civil rights movement of the 50s and early 60s. His characters were non-confrontational Black men with whom white viewers could sympathize, while Black viewers could appreciate that his characters were markedly different from past stereotypes, unquote. Actually, I think that's an oversimplification. He could be confrontational, but, you do see that Poitier sort of walked to let other people run later whose on-screen personas were much more confrontational and great, I think. But clearly that you needed Poitier as that pivot. Perhaps Sidney Poitier's most prominent short-term effect was to get other minority-focused projects into development that didn't necessarily star him in the end. For example, 1960s, Sergeant Rutledge, directed by John Ford and starring Woody Strode as an African-American sergeant on the Western frontier, falsely accused of the rape and murder of a white woman. Anthony Quinn's and Yul Brynner's roles during this groundbreaking civil rights era are part of true cinema literacy, just not quite part of this C-list. Some consider the first film directed by a Latino American, in this case Anthony Quinn, to be 1958's The Buccaneer, starring Yul Brynner as a white man named Jean Lafitte and Charlton Heston as Andrew Jackson, in a rather fictionalized version of the Battle of New Orleans. Besides the three 1961 movies on this C-list, one could also make the case that in terms of budget, 1961's West Side Story, which is already covered on the A-list, represents some kind of high watermark for Hispanic representation up to that point. West Side Story was only the most successful Broadway musical of the 50s not to be written by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein, who pioneered the integrated musical in 1945 with their show Oklahoma. Let me quickly say, the show is all white. Integrated musical merely means every song advances the plot. And then, right, well, that's why I say that in Fits and Starts, that duo pioneered a different kind of integrated musical. Now, what do I mean by Fits and Starts? Well, Rodgers and Hammerstein's broadly popular Pulitzer and Tony winning 1950s ran this way. Smash hit South Pacific, flop Me and Juliet, smash hit The King and I, flop Pipe Dream, modest hit Flower Drum Song, and then in late 1959, smash hit The Sound of Music, whose film adaptation appeared on the AFI 100 and another podcast. Other than The Sound of Music in the 50s, when Rodgers and Hammerstein shows became less integrated by race, they became less successful. So that's, I think, actually really interesting. Of their four big hits, The King and I was adapted into a film first, covered last podcast. I came close to including 1958's film version of South Pacific on this list, but novice film students have got to be carefully taught, as the song goes. And South Pacific is only secondarily a tale of allyship with the Bloody Mary character, who is played by African-American Juanita Hall in Yellowface. Still, during this decade, within their hits, they went from just a few Asians in support in South Pacific to roughly a half Asian cast in The King and I to the all Asian American cast of Flower Drum Song. No one else at their level, Rodgers and Hammerstein's level, made any kind of progression like that. So the first line about the century's greatest stage musical partnership, they are that for sure, the greatest duo, is that they brought maturity to the musical. But if you read their obituary, if you read the very first line of their wiki, that's what it's going to say. Rodgers and Hammerstein brought maturity to the musical. But what I would say they really brought, compared to their predecessors, was awareness of the world outside white America. They needed those Asians. The evolution of Rodgers and Hammerstein, along with films like Sayonara and The Bridge on the River Kwai, which they were not involved with, caused a bit of an Asian flowering, which probably helped San Francisco writer Chin Yun Lee, who was having trouble pitching his novel, Grant Avenue, about a mistakenly arranged marriage in SF's Chinatown, until one publishing house took a chance in 1957. Thanks to their friend, writer-producer Joe Fields, Rodgers and Hammerstein purchased the adaptation rights and made Chin Yun Lee's retitled book, Flower Drum Song, into a major hit novel. Yeah. By the time Rodgers and Hammerstein were casting in 1958, the flowering was real enough that 4 other Broadway shows were launching with Asian actors. Did you know that in 1958, Lorelei?
No.
Which made it hard for the musical legends to find enough Asian actors. Huh. Thanks to Rodgers and Hammerstein's association with Joshua Logan, they did have an in with new Oscar winner Miyoshi Umeki, and they cast her as Mei Lee. They denied that they had written Madame Liang for Juanita Hall, who became the first African-American Tony winner. That's actually true, when she played Bloody Mary in South Pacific, although not very many people then knew she was African-American. But Hall indeed played Liang, keeping up her traditional yellow face. I know, you'd already done. I know, that's wrong. I know, it's wrong. And Juanita Hall's such an interesting figure. She also recorded a blues album at this time, which is well regarded in the 50s. Okay, anyway. Pat Suzuki, former concentration camp internee and performer on variety TV shows, became Linda Lowe. Unknown Arabella Hong played Helen Chow. They offered any of the 3 leading male roles to Yul Brynner, who was busy in Hollywood. They offered him the chance to direct the show, which would in theory only take 3 months of his time. But even that was dominated by Fox. Worried now, Rogers and Hammerstein were now worried that the show needed more famous talent to soothe its financial backers. So they asked the one and only Gene Kelly if he would direct it, even though he had never directed a stage play, although he had co-directed some of his films like Singing in the Rain. Kelly said yes and flew around the country in summer 1958 looking to cast the male roles. In Los Angeles, he got Key Luke, well known by then as Charlie Chan's #1 son, and he actually is Chinese American, to play Master Wang. In San Francisco, he found Jack Sue, a comic host, to play comic host Frankie Wing. In Honolulu, he discovered Hawaiian Ed Kenny to play leading man Ta. And in Boston, Gene Kelly he cast his white choreographer Carol Haney's white husband, Larry Blyden, in yellowface as club owner Sammy Fong. What that adds up to is that of the 8 main roles in this breakthrough Chinese American stage musical, only 2 of those 8 were played by people of Chinese descent, namely Arabella Hong and Key Luke. Yeah. Okay, now if on any Sunday afternoon, Lorelei, during 1959, before either of us were born, you watched Broadway's first Black-directed all-Black cast performing a Raisin in the Sun at the Ethel Barrymore Theater, you could have left that, stepped onto 47th Street, walked a few minutes down 8th Avenue, eaten a nice dinner for $1, and stepped onto 44th Street to the same St. James Theater to catch an evening of Broadway's first all-Asian cast outside Mikado in Flower Drum Song, which opened in December 1958 and played to strong business for about a year. If none of that seems remarkable, if you guys are listening to this going, oh, big deal, mostly Asian cast, mostly Black cast, Broadway, 59, whatever, I don't care. Yeah, keep in mind, you also could have gone home and turned on the TV and almost certainly seen almost all white faces on that TV screen, whatever you might have been watching. In a previous podcast, I explained how Darryl Zanuck ran 20th Century Fox with instincts for entertainment, as well as sometimes incisive social messages, as in The Grapes of Wrath, Gentleman's Agreement, No Way Out, and Broken Arrow. Fox was the natural home for The King and I and South Pacific, 2 films on which Zanuck both spent and earned fortunes. However, by 1959, Darryl Zanuck was only a Fox figurehead, living in Europe and leaving the day-to-day load with lieutenants who were not quite as liberal. With Fox out of the bidding, Rogers and Hammerstein were willing, for their film adaptation, Rogers and Hammerstein were willing to listen to Ross Hunter at Universal, who had made a name for himself as the producer of Douglas Sirk's luxuriant melodramas like Imitation of Life, as well as the lush decor in comedies like Pillow Talk. So the musical duo handed over the movie to Hunter and his chosen director, talented journeyman Henry Koster. One of those 4 other Asian-themed Broadway plays of 1958 was The World of Susie Wong, in the subgenre we call Prostitute with a Heart of Gold, played based on a novel by British Richard Mason, who claimed he based it on visiting a brothel in Hong Kong. On Broadway, the title role was played by France Nguyen, a part Asian, part white actress who rose to fame as Bloody Mary's daughter, Liat, in the film version of South Pacific. After her Broadway success as Susie Wong, Nguyen was also cast in the film version, starring opposite William Holden, who was apparently returning for another Hong Kong romance as penance for his 1955 one, being with a woman in yellowface, as we just discussed. However, after 5 weeks of shooting, France Nguyen had something of a nervous breakdown, perhaps caused by her then boyfriend, Marlon Brando. Wouldn't surprise me. It seems like Brando caused a lot of breakdowns. Nguyen went binge eating during a production break and could no longer fit in the costumes. So they reshot 5 weeks in Hong Kong of the World of Susie Wong with her Broadway understudy, Nancy Kwan, who was also part Asian, part white. Just before the film, The World of Susie Wong, was released in November 1960, Nancy Kwan appeared wearing a cheongsam on the cover of Life, leading to Universal's Ross Hunter rushing to see the Paramount film and attending its premiere party, where he more or less offered the role of a lip-synced Linda Lowe to Kwan, because he was like, you don't have to sing, because she didn't know if she could, and she didn't. This was a very fateful decision, Lorelei, because it pivoted the character of Linda away from Pat Suzuki's onstage good girl mannerisms into what became known as the Susie Wong stereotype, a more sexualized, promiscuous Asian woman for the 60s. In the trailers, Nancy Kwan would be introduced horizontally, lounging on her bed with her legs fully exposed. On the poster, Nancy Kwan's name and image would appear first, beckoning viewers with naked arms outstretched in a pretty outrageously un-Asian way. Somehow, Ross Hunter had observed the original cast and decided that only 2 of them would be offered reprises of their roles in the movie, obviously one being Miyoshi Umeki, who had an Oscar, and the second being Patrick Adiarte, the Filipino-American who played Ta's very Americanized kid brother. Yul Brynner was again offered his pick of leads, for which Hunter was prepared to considerably rewrite the script. But by 1960, Brynner had in many ways moved beyond East Asian roles, which is really interesting, but that's a story for another cast. Having upgraded Sammy Fong's role in hopes of getting Brynner, Hunter allowed one original cast member an upgrade, moving Jack Soo from comedy host to club owner. Hunter offered Madame Liang to Anna May Wong, as Lorelei already told you, as her sort of valedictory role, and she accepted. It would have been great to have seen her, but she actually, as Lorelei said, tragically died a month before principal photography, which brought the role back to Juanita Hall in Yellowface again. All right. As she says in the movie, I like that. Chop suey.
Oh.
I know. At least I didn't sing that one with any accent. The other roles, I gotta say this, Lorelei, and it's not something I say every time in a podcast. The other roles of this movie feel like they were distributed almost at random, something that probably wouldn't have happened at Fox under Zanuck. Whatever else you want to say about Zanuck, he was more careful than that. Hunter's métier d'être was set decoration and production design. And, you know, in fairness, that winter on stage 12 of the Universal Studios lot, a 52,000 square foot set was built to resemble San Francisco's Chinatown. And I have to say, for all its artifice, I mean, what did you think of that set? I thought it was nice. It looked great. I mean, yeah, it's artificial, but it's still kind of a nice tribute to Chinatown, isn't it? Or what did you think of it, Laura?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Being an Asian American in San Francisco, I was like, all right, this is my kind of movie.
Well, right. I mean, it looks cool. I mean, you know, it's a set, but
yeah.
you also, but when you're watching like Pillow Talk or one of Ross Hunter's movies, like, you know, where they're like where Doris Day and Rock Hudson are running around New York, that's obviously also a set. I mean, you can. What I'm getting at is it looks setty, but it does look cool. You know.
Yeah. No, I thought the set design was really nice. But I also am a lot more forgiving of movies of that era because yes. I'm like, you can tell that most everything's a set. Like. It's
true, except in Defiant Ones, where you can tell they're running around, you know,
the woods,
parts of Southern California. Yeah,
right.
it's obviously Los Angeles National Forest, but oh yeah, go ahead, tell us it's the South, right? But you know what I mean, yeah, right. Russell Meddy brought his usual professionalism to the camera work, something I discussed on a previous podcast where I linked together 3 films that he lensed: Touch of Evil, Imitation of Life, and Spartacus. Yes, Russell Meddy may be the best cinematographer you haven't heard of if you know cinematographers. And in March 1961, Meddy's cameras began rolling on Flower Drum Song. Okay, now I know this took a while. Do we have time for me to run through the plot?
Okay, let's do it. Let's just get through it.
I like your style thing and you know, patience. After 4 minutes of elaborate Chinese print style credits, Flower Drum Song begins with a cargo steamer passing under the Golden Gate Bridge as Mei Li and her father, Dr. Han Li, sneak in on crates, gape at the beauty of San Francisco's Chinatown, hand their intended address to an Asian man who says, sorry, I don't read Chinese, and perform the Flower Drum Song, 100 Million Miracles, in St. Mary's Square. An Asian police officer breaks up the applause, finds someone who can read their note, and escorts them to Celestial Gardens, where they and we see Linda Lowe and her Corrines performing Fan Tan Fanny with an emphasis on paper fan motifs. Backstage, the cop presents Mei Li to club owner Sammy Fong, who hesitates until Han Li presents a more familiar photo, then brings them backstage to feed them what Mei Li calls great American food. Sammy corrects her that it's the best Chinese food in San Francisco, learns they were smuggled in, wonders how to keep them on ice, and claims to honor his commitment, something Linda overhears and over-erupts about, until Sammy privately claims to her that this new immigrant is for someone else, and besides, he'll buy her that convertible she always wanted. Sammy goes to the restaurant of Madame Liang. interrupts her mahjong, shows her a photo of Mei Li, and convinces her to convince her brother-in-law, the phlegmatic Master Wang, to marry Mei Li to his son Wang Ta, something we see her trying in the next scene at Master Wang's spacious estate that resembles a Chinese palace. I mean, wow, I'd love to walk into anybody's place in Chinatown that looks like that. Yet when Master Wang begins to arrange a marriage with his son, Ta leaves while laughing. That's not how it's done in the US, prompting Dad and his younger siblings to sing, "What are we gonna do about the other generation?" After Wang is robbed on the street, he goes home where Madame Liang asks what the thief looked like. To Wang's answer, "How do I know? All white men look alike." I thought that was a funny line. Sammy presents to Master Wang Dr. Han Li and Mei Li, whose teeth and chin and belly Wang finds satisfactory. When Wang hears Mei perform 100 million miracles, he's convinced he's found his daughter-in-law. Yet Liang convinces him to give Mei and Ta a week to fall in love the American way. Ta phone calls Linda Lowe to ask her on a date, and Linda accepts, hangs up, and sings to her mirrors, "I enjoy being a girl." In her new convertible, Linda transports Ta to Twin Peaks, where Ta tells her he's going to law school, but his wealthy father wants grandchildren, and after kissing, he gives her his fraternity pin, which she claims means they're going steady. Ta meets Mei Li in Wang's courtyard, leaves, and inspires her to sing of her affection for him in her song, "I Am Going to Like It Here." Liang persuades Wang to bring his box of savings to a bank, but Wang remains skeptical of the manager and the bank's security until he presses a button next to a teller that causes the cages to lower, police to scramble in, and the manager to shout, "False alarm!" After Ta's kid brother Sam tells Wang that Helen Chow has a yen for Ta, she gives him a gift for his college graduation party, doubling as Liang's citizenship party, an event to which he also invites Linda, who tells Ta they must either break up or tell her brother at the party they're getting married, so he agrees to the latter. At the courtyard party, Liang says she's proud to be both Chinese and American, causing Wang to compare her to Chop Suey, something she spins into a 6-minute song of assimilation, as I sort of just alluded to. Linda shows up with a comedian friend pretending to be her brother, Commander Lowe, who tells Wang that he agrees to let Linda marry Ta, a notion that throws the party into chaos, with Wang tut-tutting Ta and Sammy tut-tutting his comedian and Linda. At a party overlooking the Chinese New Year parade, Sammy invites the Wang family to Celestial Gardens as Linda leads a show-stopping Grant Avenue. After Sammy and Linda have a backstage fight, Linda tells a Corrine that no, Ta doesn't know what she does for a living, which is why she's quitting after tonight to get a ring on her finger. At Sammy's club, Mei Li recognizes Commander Lowe singing of the many Asian European nationals gliding through my memory. I thought that was an interesting assimilationist song. Until Linda appears, performs, and perturbs the Wang family, who run out, leaving Linda to land a bucket of ice on Sammy's head. That was before the ice bucket challenge. Helen catches up to street drinking Ta, takes him home, lets him fall asleep in her bed, and performs a song of unrequited love, "Love, Look Away," which morphs, as I'm sure Lorelei noticed, into a very impressionistic ballet with undulating polypropylene. It was kind of wild. Mei Li drops off a burned dress at Helen's, but flees after seeing Ta's coat and shoes, and Helen can't convince Ta to stay either. Back home, Ta tries to persuade Mei Li with "You are beautiful," but after what Mei Li saw in the past day, she tearfully tells Ta she cannot love him anymore. Upon the appearance of his mother, Sammy proposes to Linda, who happily accepts as the two of them sing and strut through Sunday on surreal sets surveying San Francisco with overforced perspective. I mean, were those sets wild or what? Mei Li chooses to follow her original plan to marry Sammy, a notion Sammy's mother loves, to the point of signing the marriage contract and sending out wedding invitations that infuriate Linda. And soon Sammy sojourns Mei Li around Chinatown, singing all the reasons she shouldn't marry him. Ta visits Mei Li, congratulates her, sees her watching TV, discusses American kisses on TV, demonstrates one or two, and they mutually declare their useless love before Ta leaves to let Mei Li watch a TV show where a Mexican character calls herself a wetback. At the massive wedding, Mei Li explains to Sammy's mother that her back is wet because she entered the country illegally, causing Sammy's mother to declare the contract invalid. Sammy assures Mom that Linda entered the US the right way through her mother, while Ta says he'll risk any deportation to marry Mei Li, and the double wedding commences with much rejoicing. Okay, Lorelei, you had to listen to a lot there. Any thoughts, feelings, opinions about this movie?
It was interesting for me when you were talking about how it's kind of cast at random, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that stood out to me was just like pan-Asian people. I mean,
Yes.
I've been yammering about like yellow face and like white people acting like Asians, but then it was really weird for me to see other Asians acting as other Asians. So that
Yes.
was like a little trippy for me, because like when I saw the Filipino actor, I was like, he's not Chinese at all. Like
Right.
he's totally, that's a Filipino dude.
I would trust you to notice that. And I mean, sorry, to know that like better than I would. Yes, absolutely. Sure.
And like the fact that like some of them were like struggling to try to do a Chinese accent because they don't actually speak Chinese. And like,
right. I'm sure. Well, there sure wasn't a lot of Chinese in this movie. That's one thing I missed, is like, it would have been fun to have had them speaking even just a little more. I mean,
yeah.
I didn't need them to, I didn't need it in half Chinese, but it kind of just felt like that was more elided than it should have been, if that makes any sense. You know, I think even West Side Story has more Spanish than this had Chinese. But anyway, yeah, keep going.
One thing, I loved seeing Jack Sue because I only know him from Barney Miller.
Right. Oh, I know that.
Oh, great to see him.
I know, and he's great. I mean, it's funny because that voice is so distinct. The minute you hear it, you're like, it transports you to Barney Miller, you know.
Oh, for sure. And I don't know if there was there anything, let's see, 1961, was there any other films at the time that showed Asians without accents, right? Because it's like, I love the opening scene, or when they're in San Francisco and they're like, I don't know, I don't speak Chinese. Like, what do you?
I loved that. That was great. And I don't know, I mean, if there can't be very many of them. That this has to be relative. This is another thing I mean about like things that only come through when you have like I said, an all black cast in Raisin in the Sun. To me, once you have an all Asian cast, you run much less risk of the director saying to the one Asian actor, hey, could you Asian it up a little or something, you know, or whatever.
Right, because you're outnumbered.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Whatever it takes. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed seeing like, oh, this is what Asian Americans were like in 1961. Like this was even before my parents came over from the Philippines. Like it was really cool to sort of like see these movies as kind of historical documents of the time. I mean, not that I'm saying that any of this is historically accurate, but just seeing like how the people acted and how they dressed. And it was I enjoyed it, even though it was like, you know, I'm not going to consider a musical any sort of like of historical accuracy, right?
No, right. Well, I think even first of all, they changed the novel a lot. I was told, you know, that it's a much more sort of dramatic novel. It focuses more on Master Wang. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, but it's a novel. It was never, as you say, it's not meant to be a true story anyway, you know, but of course it's going to say some things, right? What else did you think? Anything else?
I did go down a rabbit hole of Jack Sue. So
yeah, well, I didn't know his original name was Suzuki, which means he's Japanese, you know, which I thought was
right. That's a whole thing that was happening, right? Like for a long time. But I thought it was interesting that he had actually performed at the Forbidden City nightclub, which inspired the Celestial Gardens nightclub. Like there was actually a nightclub like that in San Francisco, Chinatown, that was kind of like the Asian Cotton Club. And so a lot of the story apparently came from that particular club that Jack Sue performed at.
Isn't that great? So life imitated art, imitated life kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, it feels like things like that can only happen again with like an all Asian cast. I mean, just little permeations of actual culture are going to sort of filter through, you know, at least a little, you know, besides the big Rodgers and Hammerstein version of what Asian music sounds like. And they don't ever get that right. I mean, and I guess the generous interpretation is that they don't even try. I mean, I cringed a bit when we were in the middle of that Grant Avenue, and then they suddenly went to a sort of a more Asian thing, and like Nancy Kwan did this. Did you catch that? Because I was like, don't even try, Rodgers and Hammerstein. Don't try. Don't.
Oh try. Yeah, so like some of the songs, I was definitely like, oh, I don't know. You should have gotten someone else to like figure out the song.
Oh yeah,
like Chop Suey. I don't know about that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Well, that's such a wild song. I mean, I think that, yeah,
I get the point they were trying to make with the song, but still.
Right. I think the thing is musicals kind of live and die by the quality of the songs. And I just think the songs here aren't quite as good as the ones in South Pacific. That's one reason people don't see Flower Drum Song as often, you know, and I get that. I mean, that's, you know, I think it's still good, at least good. You know, it's interesting. It's fun. We kind of know what's going to happen, but I mean, and you know, if you like musicals, I mean, I don't know if I'd recommend this movie to everybody, but you know, there's a lot of fun things happening.
Yeah, I forgot about that ballet scene though. Like that was very. When was this in comparison to American in Paris? Because it makes
right. Well, that's, you know, it's funny. I wondered if Gene Kelly had anything to do with it either, because he, you know, that American in Paris is 51. It's 10 years earlier.
Okay.
And then, you know, Singing in the Rain also has some surreal American in Paris stuff, like in the third act. And I think that it did feel like they were trying to do something like that. Now, I don't know what happened in the original stage show, but I thought, actually, in a way, I respect that they went for something very kind of ambitious and weird, and they didn't just say to themselves, well, it's an Asian movie, we can't do that. No, they can do it. If they're going to do it in an American Paris, they can do it here, you know? So I think that was fine. Yeah, because it was almost like a salute to ballet that you really don't see coming. I mean, at least I didn't. I'm watching this going, wait, what? There's ballet in this? Or that, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Musical numbers, I thought they definitely represented sort of like the musical style of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I mean, that's not all awful, but yeah, exactly. If we went into a Broadway theater in the 50s, this is what they'd be dancing like, and on any show, not just this one, which is, you know, problematic, but also it's still, I mean, I guess I like to think of it as a step forward compared to what Asian representation had been, you know? I wondered if the writers and producers were seeking the transitive properties of the Latino immigrant experience to be transferred onto Asians. I wondered about that, number one, with Ricardo Montalban in Sayonara, but then also with that wetback thing towards the last 5 minutes, because it's sort of like, maybe that's the only way white people can understand. So I like to think that now we realize that, you know, the Asian American experience and the Latino American experience is very different. But I can see why white people might like to think that it's similar or something. So let's like conflate them or something. So I don't know. I mean, that wetback thing was really fascinating to me at the end. Now I know it's just nothing. I know it's a quick thing, but I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
It came out of left field. I was like, oh my gosh, like what is going on here?
I know it was like, wait, what word did she just say? You know, I mean, as with Sayonara, perhaps the most remarkable thing about Flower Drum Song is the budget, roughly $4 million, about the same for The King and I movie. This was medium to high at the time because there was no way to make musicals cheaply. The movie did reasonable but not tremendous business. Critics didn't like it much. Some Asian people complained that Kwan's character's sexuality did not represent Asian women. Some also complained that Shigeta and Umeki were Japanese people playing Chinese people, arguably an insult to Asia's most violent rivalry of the century. Flower Drum Song was nominated for 5 below-the-line Oscars and didn't win any. In 1961, Flower Drum Song became the first Hollywood feature film with an all-Asian American cast and the last one for more than 32 years until the Joy Luck Club. That is a head shaker of a statistic, whatever anybody says or does. Anything else about Flower Drum Song before I keep talking? Before we start.
Wait, what was the period of time between Joy Luck Club and Crazy Rich Asians? That's
another almost 30 years, not quite 30, 25-ish. Yeah, I know what happened. I mean, it's an outrage. It's now I like to think it won't be 25 more years. But yes, no, I mean, that when Crazy Rich Asians came out, that came up. People were saying that this is the first one in 25 years, you know. Yeah, like,
well, I do appreciate the fact that there are, you know, thanks to sort of, well, maybe not thanks to, you know, the globalization of media, right? Yeah. So I haven't seen Squid Games, but apparently that's a huge thing all over the world, right? So you're gonna eventually get your all Asian cast.
Yes, no, that's a good point, right? It's a good thing that movies like Parasite are winning Best Picture. It's not the same as an all Asian American cast, but, you know, yeah, I mean, we're getting a little bit more aware. I don't think it's going to be 25 more years, especially since I know they're making Crazy Rich Asians too, or some other name. Well, it might be called something else, but you know what I mean. anything else about Flower Drum Song? I mean, I'm glad it wasn't, you know, it has its cringy moments, and nobody's arguing it doesn't, but you know, kind of tries. I guess I'm touched by it on some. Did the sexualizing of you know, the whole Susie Wong stereotype, was that bothering you at all while you were watching that?
Well, I found her character kind of annoying. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't really think of it as like a representation of like,
right.
I just found the character annoying.
Yeah, I get that.
She's gold digger, right? But I didn't think of it as like she's an Asian gold digger. I just thought of
right. Well, I guess maybe that's progress, where Asians can play the same kind of gold diggers that white ladies have been playing all this time. Oh, right. Those were never good roles for white women. Right, that too. Okay. In some ways, it feels like Flower Drum Song was both the culmination of the 1950s Asian American flowering and a sort of a jump the shark moment for it. After the extra attention, Broadway and Hollywood got nervous about that criticism I just mentioned, and they scaled back on Asian representation. It also probably didn't help that if you took the profit revenues of today's three closely examined 1961 films and combined those three profit margins, they still wouldn't add up to the total gross of 1961's, you know what I'm about to say, Breakfast at Tiffany's, in which screen legend Mickey Rooney plays Audrey Hepburn's landlord in an excruciating, unforgivable yellow face and accent. If Marlon Brando had evolved a little in the 5 years since the Tea House of the August Moon, since he was in, you know, yellow face and accent, Mickey Rooney and director Blake Edwards seemed determined to drag Hollywood right back to sub-Brando pandering, apparently on behalf of the glamour of Audrey Hepburn. Another problem with the romantic comedy Breakfast at Tiffany's, one that you will not learn about by reading its wiki, is that in Truman Capote's source novel, the narrator, who is the Paul character, has no romance with Holly Golightly, likely because Truman Capote is gay and wrote the story. So in 1961, it sounds like Audrey Hepburn used her considerable stardom to execrate Asians and erase the queer, right? Well, yes and no. In the same year, Hepburn's stardom also guaranteed the budget for what was in many ways Hollywood's first full-length fiction film about the LGBTQ. When students first learn about the Children's Hour, they are sometimes surprised to hear that the 1961 movie was based on a play from 1934, as though to say, wait, anyone was writing plays about gay people in the 1930s? So imagine they're further surprised to learn that Jewish American author Lillian Hellman based the play on the case of two female teachers in Scotland in 1810 who were sacked because of an untrue allegation of a romantic relationship. Lillian Hellman was inspired by others, of course, including Mae West's 1927 play Drag, and the general gestalt generating from Berlin, which Hellman visited in the early 30s and which served as the basis for Christopher Isherwood's Goodbye to Berlin, in which the gay author hangs out with and introduces us to divinely decadent Sally Bowles, who inspired Capote's creation of Holly Golightly. Okay, anyway, in the early 30s, Lillian Hellman worked as a reader for MGM and theatrical producer Herman Shumlin. Hellman wanted to write a play to teach herself what a play should look like, and in 1932, her lover, Dashiell Hammett, yes, that one, told her about the 1810 case that she knew would be easy to update to upstate New York in the 30s. After Hellman wrote it, she sat in her boss Shumlin's office while he read it, and when he was done reading, he told her he'd produce it. Like Mae West, both Hellman and Shumlin knew the value of controversy in a state, New York, where the onstage mention of homosexuality was illegal, although in this case, the state censors decided not to protest, perhaps because of the play's ending. Hellman was both ahead of her time and poorly timed. The play debuted on Broadway in 1934 at the same time that the more rigorous Hays Code came into effect, making any movie adaptation impossible. Or did it? Hellman was eager enough to break into Hollywood that she made a deal with Samuel Goldwyn to alter the story's central rumor into one woman having slept with the other's fiancé, and it was released in this denuded form as These Three in 1936. As director, Goldwyn hired the efficient, anonymous William Wyler, who moved from there to more A-list material and became the first director to twice win Best Director and Best Picture for Mrs. Miniver in 1943 and The Best Years of Our Lives in 1947. By 47, Lillian Hellman was a well-established playwright and screenwriter whose career was soon canceled because she refused to name names to HUAC, later memorialized in the book The Julia Wars. As mentioned on a previous podcast, William Wyler sojourned to Rome in the early 50s, realized it didn't look like neorealist movies, and made Roman Holiday, which introduced Audrey Hepburn, made her a star, and made her the beau ideal for post-screwball romantic comedies like Breakfast at Tiffany's. Roman Holiday also inaugurated the so-called Hollywood on the Tiber era of runaway production and travelogue films like Sayonara, which reached its apogee in 1959 with William Wyler's Ben-Hur, which cost $15 million, that was a lot then, earned almost 10 times that, got nominated for 12 Oscars and won a record 11, making Wyler the first and Lorelei still only person to win Best Director and Best Picture on 3 separate occasions. Whoa. At that point, Wyler could have done almost anything he wanted. Are you going to argue with the only guy with 3 Best Picture Oscars? The fact that he, along with Hepburn, chose an almost unedited The Children's Hour has the feeling of a long-kept promise fulfilled to Lillian Hellman and to the larger LGBTQ community, then mostly underground. Last podcast, when I didn't have Lorelei with me, I mentioned that 1956 Tea and Sympathy changed its lead character from a gay man into a sissy and was still more daring than any film had been up to that point. That's only 5 years before this. In 1961, the Hays Code still forcefully opposed any whiff of homosexuality, but the Hays Code in 1961 was not the Hays Code in 1941. One reason for this was Otto Preminger, whom I mentioned last podcast as the boyfriend of Dorothy Dandridge and gleeful breaker of many of Hollywood's taboos, repeatedly courting and then monetizing controversy with posters that said words to the effect of the movie they don't want you to see. One of those campaigns made a hit out of Anatomy of a Murder, one of the first big budget films to centralize rape, which was nominated for Best Picture but lost to Ben-Hur like everything else. Another big hit of 1959 was Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, where Jack Lemmon's character more than flirts with homosexuality, answering Tony Curtis saying, "But why would a guy marry a guy?" with "Security!" Already covered on the A-list, the fact that this fabulously funny film had code approval, combined with Oscars being won by the once blacklisted, demonstrated that both the blacklist and the Hays Code had somewhat overreached in the 50s and were now close to paper tigers, whatever spite Hedda Hopper might write. Truman Capote was both gay and blacklisted, so there was an element of radical redress in his resituation as the writer of both Spartacus and Breakfast at Tiffany's. As for The Children's Hour, it represented both a radical redress pivot as well as something unfortunate that's best left until after the narrative is unveiled in today's 5th and final plot summary. One last thing before I do get to that final plot summary, which I know everybody's waiting for quickly so we can finish this thing up. One more thing. After Wyler had more or less conducted a Roman military campaign to make Ben-Hur, he was by all accounts happy to return to the normal directing of a movie that he knew serve as its own kind of campaign. As a gesture to his then 25-year-old film These Three, Wyler cast that film's Martha Miriam Hopkins in the crucial role of Aunt Lily Mortar. The shoot, mostly conducted on location at the Shadow Ranch in the San Fernando Valley, went well, and The Children's Hour was released in Christmas 1961, while Raisin in the Sun and Flower Ground Song remained in some theaters. Okay, now the summary. I know, can you believe this? This is for people who like a medium dive. That's all I could say. At the rural Wright Dobie School for Girls, Karen Wright and Martha Dobie happily observe a room full of parents observing a student music recital. Preteen Mary plays a prank on Rosalie, complains of stomach pains, and despondently attends the recital's outdoor picnic until she sees and hugs her doting grandma, Amelia Tilford. After, in the kitchen, when Karen and Martha muse over what to do with their school's first ever surplus, Martha insists that Karen needs new clothes because she's sort of a Fifth Avenue type, something she noticed the first time she saw her in college and thought, what a pretty girl. As Karen walks the dorm, putting the girls to bed, her boyfriend, Dr. Joe Carden, helps himself to school food, earning Martha's reprimand. Martha and Karen are about to take a walk together, but Joe says he doesn't want to take 2 girls. So he takes Karen on a drive where he's quite grumpy about Karen's many postponements until Karen asks if they can have a baby in 12 months and says, "Oh, I love you, I love you." When Karen returns to school and tells Martha of their newly impending nuptials, Martha drops an iron in frustration that Karen's marriage will ruin everything. But as Karen opens the door to go, Martha wishes her all the best, while Mary, that preteen Mary, woken by the iron, discreetly observes her teachers air kissing each other's ears in forgiveness. The next day, Mary gives her teacher, who is Martha's Aunt Lily, the gift of flowers that Karen recognizes from the trash, leading to a post-class grilling of Mary, who insists she picked them at the lake. So Karen takes away many of Mary's privileges, and Mary collapses as though of heart failure. While Joe examines Mary, Lily accuses Martha of always having been jealous and unnatural. So Martha suggests Lily live her long festering dream of moving to New York, but they open the door to find Mary's friends eavesdropping. Joe mentions his coming matrimony to no comment from Martha, so he cordially communicates his concerns until Martha makes him back off and mentions to Karen that they need to be even stricter with Mary. Mary hears from her friends about Lily and Martha's chat, bullies Rosalie for money and an engraved bracelet, gets into her grandma's car, and ascribes everything to Wright and Dobie hating her and moving Mary's room so that they can keep secrets, and Mortar calling Dobie jealous and unnatural, and also something whispered that shocks Amelia Tilford. Mrs. Tilford enters the school, asks for Wright or Dobie, waits, and chats up emotion-filled moving out Miss Mortar, who confirms there's something unnatural about both her niece refusing men as well as her being obsessed by Karen Wright. Tilford leaves, gets into her car, and tells Mary Mary's never going back to that school, to Mary's exhilaration. Soon 1950s tail fin tip cars fill up the parking lot as parents pull their girls out of the school while Karen and Martha ask why, to no answer from anyone, until Martha watches as Karen inaudibly corners the last dad out the door. With Rosalie's parents having stuck her at the Tilfords, Mary bullies Rosalie into an oath of allegiance by threatening her that she'll be sent to a home for delinquent girls for borrowing an engraved bracelet Rosalie took from Helen Burton in order to look nice. At the mansion of Amelia Tilford, she warns Joe not to marry Karen. As Karen and Martha storm in, demand answers, learn that Tilford told the town they were lovers, and call Amelia a liar who is destroying their lives, even as Joe sides decisively with Martha and Karen and demands to see Mary. In front of all of them, Mary stands by what she said, claims she's always being punished for knowing too much, and says she saw them kissing through Miss Dobie's keyhole. But when Martha says her door has no keyhole, Mary cries, scrambles, and says Rosalie saw them and she didn't want to tattle on her. Brought into the room, Rosalie says she never told Mary anything about Dobie and Wright doing anything, but Mary says, don't you remember? It was the day Mrs. Burton said whoever took Helen's bracelet would go to jail. And Rosalie cries, yes, I saw it, I said it. Autumn leaves blow on, but mostly rest all over the unused playground equipment of the Wright Dobie School as Karen and Martha sit around and mope. When Aunt Lily arrives, Martha blows up at her that their unsuccessful slander lawsuit couldn't counter the defense that Martha's own aunt never responded to a summons or sought to explain her damning remarks that the judge said meant the plaintiffs were in, quote, sinful sexual knowledge of one another, unquote. Lily says it wouldn't have helped for them all to get mixed up in it, and Martha kicks her to the other side of the complex until the arrival of the next train going out of town. After Joe gets fired, Joe finds a new doctor job far away, comes to the school and insists the three of them move together, to Martha's very reluctant agreement. After Martha leaves and Karen says, quote, there aren't many safe words anymore, quote, she and Joe go back and forth on changes and hidden feelings and Karen's insistence that Joe leave for a few weeks to test that they truly both love each other, leading to Joe's very reluctant agreement. Rosalie's mom stumbles upon the bracelet, uncovers the truth, and confronts Amelia Tilford, who confronts Mary. And then, 91 minutes into the film, and what feels like 90 years into Hollywood history, with great difficulty, Martha admits that she loves Karen, but never meant to, saying, quote, I never loved a man. I never knew why before. Maybe it's that, unquote. Martha can't stand to have Karen look at her, feels responsible for ruining both their lives, and says, quote, I feel so damn sick and dirty, I can't stand it anymore, unquote. Karen opens the door to Amelia Tilford, who says Mary and Rosalie admitted the lie, and Judge Potter will reverse the decision and the damages will be paid in full. After Karen kicks out Tilford, Karen tells Martha that she wants to leave the town with Martha, and Martha says she's tired, she'll sleep on it. Martha grimaces as she watches Karen walk outside in her overcoat, and Karen thinks at the school's gate until she hears Lily calling out for Martha, realizes it's been too long, runs back, finds Martha's door locked, clangs on it with a candlestick, crying, Martha, and finally opens it to find Martha hanging from a self-drawn noose. At the funeral, Karen pledges love for Martha and walks away solo, head held high, as Joe and others watch her go. Okay, Lorelei, last time I'm going to ask you this. What did you think? What stands out?
Yeah. You know, I don't know if it's because Veronica Cartwright was in this, but it felt like a horror movie. Like,
she playing the same role she played in Alien. I mean,
I know. And Body Snatchers, like,
yeah, she's so good at that.
It was so funny. I was like, oh my God, that's Veronica Cartwright.
She's 10 and she looks the exact same. I know. I had the same thought. I'm like, oh my God. But this is a good, I think this is a really good film. I mean, it's not just a groundbreaking film, although it is that. I think it's well done. I mean, did you think it was?
Huh?
Did you think it was, well done? I mean, can you think of any?
Yeah, I thought it was really well done. Although I kept thinking, I was like, I'm going to call this Children of the Corn Hour.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. Because
Mary, like, she is terrifying.
Oh,
like,
she is.
She's going to go to as far as she's going to go to like get what she wants. And that was right out of a horror movie, out of this horror movie.
We all knew at least one kid like that growing up. I mean, there's but they found the right actress. I will say that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That, so it was funny, like thinking of that in the vein of like Get Out,
sure.
like I don't think that is how they wanted to portray it, but it felt that way, at least from the perspective of now.
Yeah.
And honestly, I didn't know if they were actually gonna say that they were lovers, because they avoided it for so long. And then he has the conversation with the dad, and that's done, behind the window, so you can't hear what they're saying. So I thought throughout this whole thing, they're just not even going to mention it. It's just going to be implied.
I was wondering when we got to like that middle scene, what euphemism they might use, just in front of Amelia to say, here's the lie, or would they whisper it and not say it? But what they said was that I think you actually have Audrey Hepburn saying that we were lovers, and I thought, okay, that's the fact that that's Audrey Hepburn, who, there's no, I mean, what's Hollywood going to do? Ban Audrey Hepburn's next 2 movies? That's impossible. She was like, you know what I mean? There's no way they're going to do that.
Yeah. And and I think it's only actually mentioned that one time, right? And then they sort of drop the term.
They do. That's right. Although, yes, that is true. And then, where it gets braver is the last 20 minutes when she's saying, when Shirley MacLaine as Martha is saying, that I loved you, and that, I mean, that's really, it's great. And it's also not great, because it's much, much more than Hollywood had ever done before, especially for the second build character and not just some, miscreant that's barely in the movie. So it's much more, but it's also sort of terrible, because she's like, I hate myself. This is awful. Feeling gay feels horrible. So it's a mixed bag,
Yeah, I was really bothered by it, that like, maybe that's the only way that it could have been made at that time, but that she had to be penalized, right?
Yes.
Like,
well, that's it. Yeah.
In the most horrible way, right? Like, she's got to feel terrible about herself, and then she's got to hang herself. And it felt like that in Sayonara too, right? Like,
yes,
this isn't allowed to happen. And so since it's not going to happen, we're just going to give it a terrible ending. And that's,
it seems
I don't like that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And the Madame Butterfly thing comes back in a way, because the woman's always expendable. Let her kill herself, and like, I mean, that because the rest of us are fine, I mean, I think, so this seems like a good time to segue into the bury your gays trope, which is a trope. Yeah, well, I mean, so as we're saying, The Children's Hour does stand as groundbreaking representation. It is that, because think about it. This guy had just made Ben-Hur, the biggest film of all time or whatever, or the biggest Oscar-winning film of all time. You know, I mean, there's this was an A-list project, whatever it was else, you know, whatever else it was, right? But it also helped validate something we now call the bury your gays trope, where the gay character's death often assures the heterosexual coupling of other characters, as when, for example, Plato dies at the end of 1955's Rebel Without a Cause, permitting the Jim Judy Plato friend triangle to end in a more traditional coupling. That's one of the classic examples. That said, Karen does finish The Children's Hour without collapsing into Joe's arms. I mean, it's brave that way. I mean, I don't know about you. I was happy to kind of see that it wasn't the death of Martha, which also seemed very unnecessary to me. Like, why did she shoot herself? She didn't have to, you know, or hang herself. But anyway, like, right. So, but at least it didn't necessarily equate to Karen getting with Joe. I thought that part was actually somewhat interesting and cool. I mean, did you notice that too when you were watching it?
Yeah, that she was just like, you know what, I'm out. And I'm out in a way where I still get to live.
Right. Now, careful when you say I'm out, because I don't think Karen's out of the closet, or yeah, right. But maybe, but see, no, but I mean, I don't know, but when I'm watching that ending, that last shot, I'm kind of thinking Karen's almost leaving open the possibility that maybe a heterosexual love affair is at least not something she wants to do right now. I almost thought she was like, you know, maybe I need to look at myself again and take another look before I'm really sure how I feel. And I mean, that's not quite gender fluid, but it's not hostile to it either. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. So I thought by 1961 standards. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. You go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, no, you dropped out. So
but go ahead.
I forgot. It's
okay. We've been talking a long time. So yeah, that could be a factor. It is too bad. Well, so what it is this movie was great. It was a groundbreaker. It did. So after this movie, you had all kinds of gay themed characters showing up in movies of the 60s, which is a story I'm going to carry on with next podcast. But it also, but the flip side is this whole bury your gays trope kept showing up. And frankly, to this day, I mean, if you go to like TV tropes, is it .org? I don't even know. But if you type in bury your gays, you're going to see how often this happens. And I'm talking about like on current TV shows too. You're going to be like, oh, wow, they do get rid of them a lot, don't they? And another movie that was like that right after this movie was a movie called Victim, which is a British film. It was released in 1961. And 1962 in America, and it was known as the first film in America to use the word homosexual. Like that was what it was. You just mentioned about them naming themselves as lovers. So they didn't even want to say the word homosexual because it was considered so un-Hays Code. Well, there was this British film that, you know, sort of broke that taboo. But yes, the gay guy dies also in that. So it's sort of this like, yeah, but we can always kill them. So that's just a sort of a sad thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just not ideal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you know, I feel like you're forgetting things. I'm forgetting things. So it's probably time to wrap up. But before we do, anything about these 5, now that we've been on this incredible journey together, what have we learned? Did we learn anything on this journey, Lorelei? Maybe we learned nothing. I don't know. Was there anything that they had in common? Sorry.
Thanks for having me watch I hadn't seen any of these movies. So
oh, wow.
It was really enlightening to be able to see these and like think about like the representation of its time. And Children's Hour, I had no idea what it was about. I was just like, all right, here we go. I like me some Audrey Hepburn. Let's check out what's going on here.
What the hell right. Boy, that must have blown your mind. You're like, hello, what are we talking about? Right. That's like wanting to show your parents National Velvet, but you accidentally rent Blue Velvet. Whoops. Oh, this isn't about Liz Taylor as a kid on a horse. This is about really sick stuff, you know? Yeah, so it's kind of like that. But anyway.
Yeah. No, I like that this was just a little, you know, snapshot of films at the time and like how they perceived non-white people or, you know, non-white, non-straight people. And
right. Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think if we had to say something that kind of applies to all of them, I think the general vibe of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I don't think that's wrong to say. And we've talked about those steps forward and we've talked about those steps back. And I think that's what we sort of needed to do today. I think it's really valuable for people to remember that these representations at the time of the queer, of Asians, of Asian Americans, of Black persons in non-musical dramatic lead roles had never been done by classical Hollywood ever, right? So even if they were somewhat imperfect, which we now can recognize, they still blazed a trail that others could and did follow with better representations. I mean, that's how this works. People, they say, you know, somebody else comes along and says, well, the audiences handled this, so certainly they can handle this next thing, which will be even, you know, more kind of true to life or whatever, if that makes sense.
And I think it's an interesting time that we're in. I feel like we're in that period right now.
Yes.
And I think also because there's just so much content out there.
How can
like they need to fill some stories, right? So like if they're gonna get stories from wherever they can, and I'm grateful that they're gonna be able to get stories from underrepresented communities, and not only that, but stories that directly from those underrepresented communities.
Yes.
Right? Like you are getting some amazing stories that are coming from Asian filmmakers, from Black filmmakers, from you know, all kinds of filmmakers.
Sure. Yes. And I appreciate you as sort of an insider on this, helping bring those underrepresented voices to life. I mean, you're sitting there at ILM and giving these people voice and articulating them. So that's also great to me that you're there to help, you know, like
it's a really interesting time to be in the industry right now. Like I am seeing change happen for sure.
Right. Do you also see it like behind the scenes where you are kind of, you know, like
we're trying, you know, the visual effects branch of the Academy has the lowest representation. And well, I'm really grateful that they just accepted me.
So, I didn't know that. Congratulations.
Because they're trying to diversify, right?
And I'm sorry, did you just become an Academy voter or something like recently?
A couple years ago. I don't know if a couple of years ago, yeah.
That's amazing. Well, that didn't even come up. I mean, this is the first I've heard it, but that's really great.
I don't like to talk about it too much, but I do appreciate that they were like, you know, we need more voices.
So you're one of like 10,000 Academy voters. Wow. And my audience is lucky enough to get you on this. That's pretty lucky for them right there. But no, I do think, because you bring the right attitude to this stuff. I mean, you're not, you know that the past was the past, but it also informs the present, you know, and that we need to, you know, move forward. And I think that's great. I mean, that's, you know, so I'm personally very excited. You as an Academy voter, that's awesome.
Oh, I'm definitely getting my opinion in there.
Well, I bet, because I trust you to actually watch the films too, and not just be like, okay, well, I guess everybody's voting for this, so I'll just vote for it, you know?
Yeah,
I suspect you don't
totally.
do that.
I do not plan on doing that. I want to actually watch the movies.
Right. That's awesome. Well, hey, now I know who to hit up for the next time no, I'm kidding. Hey, got any screeners? No, I'll try not to do that. I have other people I can bother with that. Let you get through your day unbothered with such requests. Well, but I also want to say thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It was awesome. I thought this was terrific.
Thank you. No, thank you. This has been, it's been enlightening, like watching all these movies.
I hope, well, you know, maybe just a hair, right? But yeah, fun. Hey, Sidney Poitier is still with us. Let's all keep that in mind. He's there.
I know.
Isn't that great? He's with us now. I love that.
It's amazing.
It really is amazing. Him and Harry Belafonte, who are friends. Thank God they lived to their 90s. But isn't it great that they went through this period we're talking about, and now they can live to see this current period you're talking about, which is, I think, I just love that they got this far, and they could see how much things had changed. Partly thanks to their efforts, right?
That's got to be so satisfying.
It really did. Right. You can know that you change, you know, maybe you didn't do everything, but like incremental progress, right? You know, they know that they were responsible for some of it, and I think that's great, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you one more time. I just want to quickly thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. I'm just going to do my outro now, where I tell you that the story continues and expands next week with more disenfranchised groups, expands 2 more underrepresented groups with the Miracle Worker, Cheyenne Autumn, the Pawnbroker, Night of the Living Dead, no, not in the Corn, and the Boys in the Band. I hope you'll join me. Until then, save me some popcorn, because there's always another movie to see.